It is now 7 PM Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, and I call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. Cindy, would you please call the roll?
Arlandu,
Here.
Kilburg,
Present.
Locke, Mathis,
Here.
Sliger,
Present.
Meadows,
Present.
Gonzalez Thomas,
Present.
All right, the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Tom.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
And are there any items to add or remove from the agenda?
No,
No.
we covered the
Okay.
speakers, yeah.
All right, Holly, do we have any public comment for today?
We do not.
We do not, so I will spare everybody from me reading from that section. Cut 10 minutes off the meeting right there. All right, and I do not believe we have any BPS partners today. So we wish them on whatever they're enjoying their summer break on. And then board liaison committee reports. Does anybody have any to share today? Summer. Oh, that's surprising, though I got every invite on earth from Josh Bulak yesterday. So.
That time of the year.
Yeah.
So for the CAC team, I was they had it today, I think,
Okay.
at 1 PM. I was unable to attend, but Brad, if you wouldn't mind giving a couple highlights.
Sure, we had a summer curriculum and assessment advisory council meeting today. We talked about the work that was done June 3rd, 4th, and 5th, which is our summer curriculum league. So we had over 90 people, 90 teachers who did the quick turnaround from ending school to come back to work for 3 days on curriculum. A lot of middle school and high school groups, so that communication will go out to staff here in a week about all the updates to the curriculum, and what those teams worked on. We talked about the board policy on instructional materials, about operationally defining anchor, supplemental, and responsive materials, and then giving teachers a way to work that process, so that's in the works. We talked about our subject area leadership teams, which you might hear called SALT teams, and there are some spice to them sometimes, but we're gonna work this year on a K-5 social studies pilot. So we had teachers opt into that for this year. There are 42 elementary teachers who are going to be participating in that pilot, which we think is super exciting. It's really based on inquiry and getting kids to ask great questions about the community they live in, the state they live in, and really recognizing how social studies can really impact them. We'll have a K-12 science team that's working, and then a K-5 and a 6-8 team working on English language arts. So those will be kind of our major curriculum projects for this year, and our conversation centered around how do we get people involved in this work so that they feel empowered to lend their voice to this work. And then we spent some time talking with Tom about our structure. So we set up CAC about 12 years ago, and things have changed in 12 years. So we wanted to make sure we were having conversations about, are we as effective as we need to be? How can we maybe transform ourselves a little bit to meet the greater needs? There's so much curriculum work that's going on in the district due to changing standards and our desire to get better. So really looking at, are we the team set up in the right way for that success? So really good conversations today. Happy to have Tom be a part of those conversations. We had a good group. So I was very happy with the conversation today.
Can I ask a couple, because I'm taking, I just don't, the science, the K through 12, how many is all grade level, like, how many teachers I didn't know if you said that. How many teachers were participating in that one?
We don't know yet. So like,
Okay.
we just approved, like, these are the ones we're gonna offer. So we'll now put this out to the staff
Okay.
and see who wants to participate. But our conversation was like, how do we get more people to participate? And I think that, we ran a science leadership team last year, and we had very few people from the elementary want to be a part of that. But we have a lot of work to do in that area because the standards are pretty complex. We had more secondary people, but like we were discussing today, how do we get more people involved in that process?
And the same with ELA, is that K through 12?
We're gonna do, it's K through 12, but we're gonna do a K-5 group because their needs are pretty defined. and then a 6-8 group. Because their needs are a little bit different. Anything I missed, Tom?
No, I think that's actually to what Brad was highlighting earlier. That was actually a natural product of the conversation about how do we differentiate the needs instead of trying to treat it always as pre-K through 12 as a conversation, you know, based on the feedback and trying to be responsive to where different needs are. I think Brad absolutely highlighted, and we talked about maybe it's time to kind of divide and conquer some of the areas of priority.
And that's kind of hard for us sometimes, right? Because we're a pre-K through 12 district, and that's a huge advantage for us here in Batavia, is like, we get kids for a long time, right? And we can do great things with their education, but things and needs are different. Developmentally, kids are different, so how do we respond to those needs? The needs of the teachers are different, because at the secondary level, they're more specialized within their discipline. Elementary teachers, they teach it all, so how do we balance those needs? So today was a good example of like just trying to balance continuity versus needs of staff and students.
And then just two other questions, because I'm just curious. The SALT team, are those the members on CAC, or is that totally separate?
It's separate, so it's like bringing in a farm team to help work on that, and our goals are to get a lot of classroom teachers involved in that process, and then one member of CAC will be the liaison and sit on that subject area leadership team.
And then does the SALT team, is that like voluntary, handpicked, and does it ever like rotate? Like someone sits on it for 2 years and then they are off and somebody else?
We talked about that today, because we kind of want continuity of like the work. It's hard to restart every year, but it's also hard to ask people to do like a 2-year commitment too. So that was part of our discussion, and we haven't finalized what that's gonna look like. We do like to get as many people involved as possible. One of the challenges at the elementary is you have 6 buildings. And if you don't have somebody on one of those committees within your building to kind of share that communication, sometimes the communication gets lost. And then when decisions are made, people feel blindsided by that, which is like a very natural thing, because they haven't heard about it for a year, because they don't have a representative. The best thing for communication at our elementaries is word of mouth, right? They're really good about talking to one another. Here's what's coming up. Here are the decisions that we're making. And when they have that building-based rep or that grade level rep, communication's a lot smoother and people feel less blindsided, which is our goal.
Thanks.
All right, any others? No? Okay.
I just want to call out that Fox Valley Career Center is open for course requests. It's not registration because you have to request to be in the courses, but, so if anyone out there has students interested in it, now's the time to start looking into it.
Oh, thank you. All right, consent agenda. So according to our board policy, we designate a portion of the agenda as consent for those items that do not usually require extensive discussion before board action. These items are generally routine, recurring, and can be grouped together for efficiency. Steve, I assume you'd like to share what we're gonna be
Absolutely.
reviewing today.
4.1 through 4.3 is the approval of our June 25th, 2024 meeting minutes and our 2 closed session meeting minutes from that same date. 4.4 is the personnel report. 4.5 is our payrolls and bills. 4.6 is the instruction of our closed session recordings from January 24th, 2023. 4.7 is our donations. We have one donation, sizable, from Batavia Youth Athletics for BHS basketball, which is appreciated. And 4.8 is the approval of the consent agenda.
Anyone have any questions?
I do. So, I know that we've hired a lot the past few months, so I'm just curious, is our BPS website, is that up to date with what all the positions are open?
It's close. There's a lot happening right now, but yeah, it's close.
Okay,
Yeah. We try to do like a reset every few days at this time of the year because things are changing.
right. That's why I was just curious if it's,
But yes,
if these people have been reflected on our website.
for the most part, yes.
Anything else? Okay. All right, well, thank you. Hearing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
So moved by
Second.
Danielle, second by Aaron. Cindy, please lead us in a roll call vote.
Armando,
Yes.
Meadows,
Yes.
Sliger,
Yes.
Mathis,
Yes.
Kilburg,
Yes.
Gonzalez Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes. All right, next is reports. Tom, anything you'd like to share under reports?
Yep, our FOIA reports for the board are presented and were granted as presented to you in the report book.
Okay. Treasurer report. Can I presume that's you, sir?
That is me. Yeah, nothing out of the ordinary to report.
Anyone have any questions on anything? No? Okay. All right, so our first set of actions. Action 6.1, authorization to hire contract paraprofessionals. Steve, I understand you'll be leading this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's a massive discussion unless there's lots of questions, but we're just seeking authorization to hire, based on the agreement that was approved last month, additional paraprofessionals. I think our count as of a few hours ago, and speaking with Natalie, who coordinates a lot of that, of our paraprofessional hires, we're short around 17, 18 parapros as of today. I have some good news. I saw two personnel action requests come through today for a parapro at BHS and a parapro at Grace McWayne, so that's good, but we certainly need more. The authorization here is to approve up to 8. As of, again, a couple hours ago, Natalie had identified through a series of interviews with a lot of candidates from the contract agencies, 7 parapros that we are prepared to move forward with and hiring with the different contract agencies. She noted with me that she's been very happy with the candidates that have come through, and they've actually been very, very diverse in terms of who they are and their experiences. So we're glad about that, but obviously our preference would be to hire our own people and hire people that would be our full-time employees, but we're not quite there yet. So this is authorizing us to work through our different contract agencies and continue to work on hiring those to staff our special ed classrooms properly.
Okay. Any questions from any of the board members? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to authorize BPS 101 administration to utilize contracted services in accordance with the MOU between BESPA and BPS 101 BOE that was approved at the June 25th, 2024 meeting.
So moved.
Moved by RJ,
Second.
second by Aaron. Cindy, please lead us in a roll call vote.
Sliger,
Yes.
Meadows,
Yes.
Mathis,
Yes.
Kilburg,
Yes.
Gonzalez Thomas,
Yes.
Arlandu,
Yes.
Motion passes, thank you. Second action item is item 6.2, authorize memorandum of agreement with the BEA. Who's speaking on this one?
That would be me.
Ms. Stoney?
In the bargain that we, with the BEA for the current collective bargaining agreement that we have with them, those negotiations were completed and the CBA was approved last summer. One of the components in that was a topic that we were not able to get to in those negotiations, and that was compensation for drivers of activity buses. And for those who may not be aware, the activity buses are the white 15-passenger buses that we use for after-school activities. We don't use them for school activities. Clubs, and we use them for athletics primarily and some other things, but they're generally driven by our own staff. We had a memorandum of agreement in our CBA that basically stated we would convene a committee of the administration representing the board and the BEA to talk about this in detail and figure out what, if anything, we would do about this. And given the state of those conversations, we came to the conclusion that we recommend to you adoption of this MOA that would approve a flat rate of $25 per driver per trip. So there would only be one designated driver per bus per trip for the pre and post activities related to driving. That would be getting the vehicle in position to pick up the students, it's gassing the vehicle, it's cleaning the vehicle, making sure it's ready for the next trip, administrative paperwork related to that, all those sorts of things that go into making sure that vehicle is prepared for travel, including, in some cases, depending on the time of year, warming up the bus or cleaning off the snow, et cetera. We felt this was an arrangement that we wanted to try on a one-year basis, and so that's why it's a one-year agreement. And at the conclusion of this agreement, with the board's authorization, we would discuss whether or not we would want to continue doing this in the future. What else is there to say about it? I think that's about it, yeah.
How were we handling this before? What was the agreement?
So primarily, it's used by coaches and sponsors,
Yeah.
and they have the option to either take a yellow bus, which is a charter through our transportation company, or they can choose to use one of the activity buses if they're available. There are 5 total in the district. Generally, there are 3 at the high school and 2 at the middle school, but depending on the time of year, sometimes the high school will use all 5, depending on what sports are going on and whatnot. So, if they're available. And sometimes they're not available, and sometimes they're all available. It depends on what happens to be going on a given day. But the sponsor or the coach has the ability to make that choice. Of course, if they're driving the yellow bus, they're driving the the white bus, the activity bus. They're actually doing the driving. Whereas if they do the charter, of course, there's an employee driver of the transportation company. They're not driving a yellow bus. They have to be licensed.
Is this an amount they asked for?
Yeah,
Or are we suggesting it?
this is an amount we negotiated
Okay.
that we felt was appropriate given the nature of the duties. And again, the compensation isn't for the driving per se. The compensation is for the work related to the pre and post. And it gets tricky. We talked about the logistics, administrative logistics, just not paying people for that time, and, it's not necessarily work that we're accustomed to. Like, there's not necessarily a direct supervisor of time. Coaches work on a stipend basis. They don't work on an hourly basis, and so that complicates things. Some days you might be taking a yellow bus, and some days you might be taking an activity bus, and there's a whole host of considerations to go through. So the reason why this is a temporary MOA is because we're not quite sure how this is gonna work yet, both from a logistics standpoint and whether or not this can change, well, we might need more activity buses, or maybe we'll be using more yellow buses. That's not entirely clear. One concern we do have that's adjacent to this is the cost of these activity buses post-pandemic is going up significantly. We expect our lease on these buses will expire next year, and we'll have to renew that lease. And if those expenses continue as we expect them to, it's going to go up significantly, much more expensive than what we're currently paying. So that's one concern we also have, is the long-term viability of using the activity buses given their increasing costs. So that's another factor to
So
consider.
previously, we were not paying them for driving or cleaning up or doing anything. It was just, that was your stipend, and if you need to drive the bus, you drive the bus. If you don't, you don't. That's where we were before. I think that's the question you were kind of getting to, right?
That is what I was getting at, yeah. And then to drive those smaller buses, the activity buses, do you need like a CDL, or is that just a normal driver's license for that?
Normal driver's license. Yeah, we do train folks before they
Right, okay.
take them out for a spin. But, yeah, there's no
You do the
special
training,
license.
is that what happens?
I do not do the training.
No.
Good idea. No, that you should not.
He's a pretty good driver.
Actually, he
Okay,
is.
yeah.
Any other questions from anyone else? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion. Let me skip to the right page so I say it right. I will entertain a motion to authorize a memorandum of agreement with Batavia Education Associated to provide a flat rate of $25 per trip as compensated for designated drivers of student activity buses.
So moved.
So moved by RJ.
Second.
Second by Rob. Cindy, please lead us in a roll call vote.
Gonzalez Thomas,
I'm gonna abstain due to my husband being a BEA member that drives the activity bus.
Okay.
That's fair.
Arlandu,
Yes.
Gilbert,
Yes,
Mathis,
Yes.
Slager,
Yes.
Meadows,
Yes. Thank you. Motion passes. All right, item 7.1 is board matters. So board matters is time set aside for board members to discuss important topics and allow for the board to have a dialogue on these topics. This item may be used at every board meeting as required. So we have two topics today that were requested to be discussed. One of them is about bullying, hate speech, and the second one is about employee exit interviews. So this is our opportunity and time to kind of flesh out these thoughts, see if we want, kind of coalesce into being able to give the staff and Tom direction on some information we want to get back, or recommendations that we request that they would move forward with, or for us just to be able to have a discussion in open session about these matters in a way that allows us to kind of get to the root of the matter. So the first item on the list is bullying and hate speech. Would anyone like to kick us off?
So I have something I'd like to start. So first of all, I want to say I think this is a great discussion to be having. And Tom and I talked about this, but I would love for him or the team to walk through our process when someone submits that they've been bullying, and then also when someone gets accused of bullying, what that process looks from their side.
Can we, before we start that really quick, that's a great place, I think, for us to start. I just wanted to put out there that in reviewing the policy, and I don't know enough about this, I think we're supposed to be reviewing this every 2 years based on the policy. And based on the last time that it was reviewed, I think we are past due that. So this is a great conversation to have. What exactly does that mean for us? What do we need to do to have happen during this conversation to kind of fulfill our policy duties?
Requirement? That's
Yeah.
a fair question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
So,
You want me to?
We'll go
if you
through.
don't mind, sir.
Sure, we take a lot of direction because that policy in particular, there's a lot of legal action that has taken place, whether it's court cases or action by the legislature around bullying. So the IASB policy service that you are members of came out in the spring, late spring, with their policy recommendations for this policy. So you will see probably starting next month, that policy revision for your consideration. And we would need to get, this is a great start to it, but I have to get teachers, parents, and others who are interested in participating in a feedback session around that policy, that's part of the requirement, together before you could approve that policy. So you'll start to see it next month, we'll engage people, and then we would bring it back for a second reading and approval after you've received that feedback. So that's underway because that just came out, and we'll be digesting that policy. So you're right, we're nearing the end of our 2 years. We're gonna have to renew with the state, but there's a more specific set of actions that we have to go through now with this most recent draft that they've given us.
Does that happen every 2 years?
The requirement to have a group of people review that other than the Board of Education is different. So that's a new requirement that they put in the law, is that you have to have a group to give feedback on that. So I would need parents, teachers, and staff, and then that feedback from that session would come to the Board of Education as a part of your consideration and adoption of that policy.
For clarification, in our policy, the 2 years, is that something that a previous board came up with, or is that a state mandate?
The 2-year thing is the state mandate.
Okay.
So that's in the law, that the board has to look at that every year, and then I submit our board's policy to the State Board of Education on an annual basis.
They actually keep a list online of like who's non-compliant. There was like 3 on there that I noticed this time, because as soon as I saw there was a list, I'm like, let me go check to make sure that we're
Make
not
sure we're
on
not
it.
on the list, that we don't wanna
It's
be
like
on,
checking the
yes.
obituaries, you wanna make sure you're not on it, so, yeah.
So that is coming up for the board's consideration, which is good and timely for this conversation as a kickoff to that process.
Okay, because I'm reading through the policy, the state law and policy, and it lists through, and there's the various process that it should include, but without limitation, and they go through several different key things, the frequency of victimization, student, staff, and family observation of safety at school, identification of areas of a school where bullying occurs, the types of bullying utilized, and bystander intervention or participation. So I was just curious if all of you guys who have been on the board, have you guys been part of that process, or is that something that the board does not get
It can work
involved in?
any way that you want it, where a board member could be a person to kind of observe that process, that feedback process, or that feedback can be brought to you. So either way would work for that.
What have we done in the past?
Well, the feedback process is new.
The feedback process is more new. In this renewal, it's a requirement before you can approve of that policy renewal.
So
But I don't think that's new if this is a policy that's been, the last time the policy was updated was January of 2022.
I think what he's saying is feedback requirement.
No, but this is part of what is already expected of us based on this, isn't it? Is that something
Yeah,
different?
and those things have not changed, so when that group meets, those are the types of things that we'll be talking about.
Yeah.
for-
But in the past, I don't think you guys did any of this, correct?
I
So
don't
we want-
remember specifically.
I mean, we probably should do something to make sure that we are doing it.
I think from here forward, absolutely, yeah, and it sounds like that's in process, and I think a lot of that data, at least I would be interested in seeing. And I think it sounds like, because you'll be presenting that information to the feedback group, it would, by virtue of the process, come back to us. I guess it's a valid question, what does everybody feel about, do we want to have a board representative at that group and that feedback process? To kind of see and watch it happen and understand what was going on, but I think the feedback loop could be board member and kind of directly from kind of consolidating that information. Because it's probably a lot to work through.
What does that look like? Will it be like scheduled meetings or?
Yeah, I'll probably do like a during the day one and then a night one, so different people based on their schedule can participate. And my role is just to facilitate, so I'm just there to kind of present some information so that they understand what the purpose of that is, and then like a focus group style, just to kind of hear them and look for themes that I would share back with you. And I'm very clear with people in those focus groups, like if one person says something, it won't necessarily make the report, but if I'm hearing the same things over and over again, those are the types of things that I would share with the Board of Education. But if you want to do it a different way, that we can do that too.
No,
So, as a matter of policy governance, which is one of the charges of a Board of Education, you know, there's obviously a whole slew of different policies that the board is responsible for in the board book, right? It's a pretty intense document, right? And you've probably seen in my weekly updates that I've kind of highlighted how many new legislative bills have gone through that impact public education in the state of Illinois. A lot of times that lands into board policy development, updates and reviews. So, you know, one consideration could be that the board may want to consider a more regularly scheduled visitation to board policies, whether you want to do that collectively at board meetings, or if you want to do that as a side table group work, you know, with a couple of board members and make it as a board committee off to the side, that would bring back recommendations to the board as a whole. You know, you as a peer of colleagues doing that with each other. Typically, board policy work is something of the board, and it's, again, what we as the employees of this district have to adhere to. It's your governance structure, I guess is the best way to put it. So that is one thing I've noticed we do not have in this district, and so maybe to Danielle's point, it could be a good structure to put in place so that it's not just this particular policy, but if there's fiscal policies that have to be reviewed and maintained, HR policies, curriculum policies. I mean, that's a good opportunity as a board to also be really aware, very acutely aware of legal updates that Springfield pushes forward or ISB pushes forward. So just a thought.
Just to give you some background on that particular topic for a minute, is when I first got on the board, there was, I guess, a slew of, more than usual, of press updates, information, and I probably had, I was one of the two people that said, shoot, the superintendent at the time said, hey, I might need some help going through all of this, and so myself and one other person, I was like, this is a great way to figure out how to read policy and go through, so I volunteered, and then basically gave a report and update of the changes and what we liked and didn't like and that sort of thing. It wasn't a group work, it was, we just split it and individually gave their update. So there's a mechanism for that. So, that does not have to be kind of decided right now, since it's the first we're all kind of hearing of it, but,
I think I kind of like that because there is a lot there to digest, and so
Yeah.
if we were getting updates and kind of digging into it in pieces, it would be easier to
okay.
have discussions, I think, about it.
I mean, I think there is, if it's a small group, a board committee, there are 2 or 3 people, it couldn't be 3 without open meetings, just to be clear. That if that person is also the one that kind of ties in with this feedback group, because that's part of the policy, right? And then, Tom and I have been talking a little bit about policy review as it relates to the strategic plan as well. Is there a formalized process of going through and looking at the strategic plan compared to our policies to be able to make recommendations to us as to how to update or adjust all of our policies effectively so that they're reinforcing the strategic plan, or at least not acting against it.
Yes, I think we need to put something in place because of that, the
Yeah.
strategic plan, and then just to help out with the press and so
Okay.
forth.
All right.
Whether we want it, I mean, we can mull it over and just see how do we wanna do it? Do we wanna do it together as a board, or is there only a couple people that really want to?
Yeah, right.
Well, you know, how big a ask is it too, like, you're right.
It's a-
If it's a lot for 2 people, 3 people.
Yeah,
it might-
I think what I'd like to do is, if this is okay with you guys, is if you're interested in being a part of that, feel free to email me, so we all don't have to put it out there whether we're interested or not interested. I'll work with Tom to kind of coalesce that information, and then I think this may be partially a bit of a collaborative structure between us and the admin as they educate some of us on what the policies actually say and how they enact and everything else, and then we can then work with them to bring back whomever those are, kind of the recommended revisions, updates, and whatever else. And that's not only on the bullying component that we're talking about for that policy, but others in general. Does that make sense, Tom? Mm-hmm. Okay,
Got it.
all right, so. Look at that, look at us, moving, making decisions.
Yeah.
No action items, but making decisions.
Yes.
All right, so back to the bullying topic. So if you're specifically interested in that one, just so we kind of move on something, is before we try to set this other framework in place, if you're interested in that specifically, if you email me, and we'll kind of talk about it and figure, and make sure someone's not overtaxed with the other committees we're looking at potentially adjusting representation on. Okay? Anything else on the policy component you want to review on your part before we get to this process?
I'm honestly, I'm not clear what the answer is with this, but what I'm, so I know what Brad is saying, where they're gonna do focus groups, so is that that's separate though from what we need to fulfill here on the board policy, yes? That's a separate, because on board.
Component? Is component a right word for what that
Component?
is?
It's a component of that process.
Of this process,
Of renewing that policy.
but we still would need to hit like the frequency of victimization, like visiting that, the student, staff, and family observations, although that would probably tie with that. So we're still going to need to hit those marks as
Absolutely.
well as that, okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to confirm.
No, we need to
that.
hit those things, and I can't answer whether we did it in the past.
Got it.
But I want to make sure we do it in the future.
Yes,
At
absolutely,
least I do personally.
absolutely,
Okay.
okay, thank you.
All right,
How do we wanna do this?
process next, since that was asked? So who
Yeah,
wants to
we'll
walk
talk
through?
about- Yeah, I mean, that was my initial question was,
Okay,
walk through the process.
okay.
I'm not sure who would do that, if that's Brad or Tom or.
Sure, so the general process, when a complaint comes in, and a kid can report a complaint in a number of different ways, or a parent can do that as well. So, his Safe to Helpline, reporting to a teacher, reporting directly to an administrator. The middle school has a separate process where kids can fill out a form. Those all trigger that process to start. So it starts with taking the report in any form. So we take that report, within 24 hours, our requirement is to communicate with the known parties involved. So that would be both the victim and the aggressor in that situation. And again, that's prior to any formal investigation starting, but that's a newer requirement in the law, is that the parties that we know that are involved are notified within 24 hours, which can be challenging. We then go through a process of investigating That, whether that includes interviewing other students, looking at social media, there's a variety of pieces depending on the situation. Each of these investigations is new, right? There's no like set formula or questions that you have to ask. It's really, there are some general guidelines, but we have to investigate that situation. We make a determination whether that is bullying because there is a formal definition of that bullying or it's some other form of disruption to our school environment. And then we determine supports, consequences, and interventions that might be needed in that situation. We communicate that to parents, students, and families that are involved in that. And then there is follow-up that's required as well. So that follow-up can look in a number of different ways depending on the situation. There's no one set piece for how that looks.
Are there any timeframes, Brad, on those, like, you said the 24 hours to respond to the initial, what about those other, the investigation, the follow-up, do we have any guidelines?
10 days is our window for that, which is a very good question. So 10 days. Now, sometimes that's difficult because you have like kids that you need to talk to that are sick or gone, or sometimes when you get into these investigations, they tend to snowball, right? Like, it's like opening a can of worms. Like, they just start to, oh, and now I have to talk to these 5 kids, and then there's a complaint against the person who reported, and it can sometimes be very messy in that situation, which can expand that timeline, but our goal is 10 days.
10 days after the 24 hours, or 10 days in
10
total?
days total.
10 days total.
Then I don't, and tell me if this is the wrong word to use, but resolution or communication has been given related to the incident. Is there any other follow-up after that? So meaning, I'm just thinking of a situation where, okay, you've communicated maybe a punishment or, to the appropriate parties and an outcome to other individuals. Maybe 2 weeks down the road, do we follow up and say, are you feeling better about this situation? Is the environment changed? And I don't know if 2 weeks is the right time frame, but I'm just saying some other follow-up after the, closure of the incident or,
That is definitely the best practice, is to do that follow-up. Sometimes they'll set up as a part of their communication, like you're gonna do a regular check-in with your counselor to see how things are going, or your social worker. Sometimes the deans themselves will do that follow-up, but that is the best practice, is to do that follow-up. There were some questions by the board about restorative practices, so like how do we heal those wounds, right? Because that's a real thing. That's often difficult to do, right? Sometimes they're like, I never want to talk to that person again, or I don't even want to see them, I don't want to be in classes with them. Restorative practices have to be like a mutual party thing. I think that is always our goal, is to get kids to heal some of those wounds if that's possible, but sometimes that is not possible. So I think that each case and kind of the hurt that's caused in those cases has to be assessed, whether those restorative practices can be enacted or whether we just have to set very clear parameters for how those students will interact in the future.
When we're doing the investigation, like at the grade school, is that the principal doing that work, or who's doing the?
Typically, it's the principal, yes. Sometimes I'm called in to do some of that, like if a principal's out or something, or it's a case that they've dealt with, or, there's a lack of trust in that process, then an outside person like myself would step in, but it's mostly the principal at the elementary school.
Can people, if they're, these are theoreticals, but like, could parties request someone else to come in and do the investigation?
They could request it.
Is that available to them if they want? Okay.
I don't know if we would grant that all the time, but
Right.
it's a request that parents could make.
Do you have any visual for this?
What's that?
Do you have a visual? Is there like a step-by-step process flow, something like that?
No, not that I know of.
So how do the faculty know how to follow this practice?
Our administrative staff has been trained on it, so we had the district's attorney come in and do training for us last fall on that. It was really helpful for us to get some updates on the law, see where we stood, talk about best practices and investigations, talk about how do we kind of process through those things in making a determination whether something is bullying or not, where it might need to go with one of the board's other policies. So that, and then we had a group work to develop a teacher training that we're gonna launch this year that kind of explains some of these policies and procedures.
Is there anything that is done, so I hear like for legalities or like the actual policy and procedure, what about training as far as handling a victim or even an aggressor while it is happening to ensure that more trauma is not put on them? Are we training admin and staff on that part of it, the actual emotional part, and, you know, as far as what one person might seem as that's, you know, again, like a student wrote in, that's not a nice word versus like this is, you know, this is very biased hate speech. So are we training our staff to know the differences so that they can handle things appropriately when they're reported to them?
Do you want?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And so that's where our student services teams do come in to assist in those situations and sit in as part of that conversation and process. So as Brad alluded to, like counselors and social workers, while they may be involved in the follow-up, they're also can be very much involved in the front end too.
For every incident?
I think it depends. It depends on the nature of the situation, what's occurred, sometimes it could be too, Danielle, like who's available, who the student might be comfortable with, and just trying to think of some of the things through this year alone. But yeah, the student services personnel are definitely kind of equipped to handle those kinds of things.
I mean, we talk about those issues, Danielle. We don't have any like training on them, but like that is something that our team talks about. Very few of these, you know, processes happen in isolation, so we are constantly communicating about them, and they can be really hurtful and, you know, horrible situations that kids are experiencing. So like, we want to make sure that we're getting that right for those kids, so we do process a lot together about that, but on the administrative side, there's not been like formal therapeutic type training on how to handle that.
And I have a question. So when, if someone submits that they're being bullied during that investigation time, like what's the protocol? Like, well, we're kind of doing that discovery. I mean, are the kids, like, are we telling, well, you guys stay away from each other? I mean, how does that work? What does that look like?
Yeah, every incident is a little bit different in that respect, but, you know, we talk about like retaliation will be taken really seriously during that time. We try and do this pretty quickly because we do know that like people put together stories and there's just like, we don't want these things like hanging out there for these kids because sometimes they won't come to school until it's like
Right.
there's some resolution.
Stressful.
Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of trust issues that will come up during these investigations.
Trust issues as far as the students not trusting,
That the school is safe, or that they're safe, or that they're being listened to. There's a lot of issues that will come up, like social emotional issues that I think are really impactful to learning. So we wanna make sure that we're dealing with these things so kids can access their learning.
So without like with RJ asking about like a flow chart, or I don't know if that's what we call it, but, so there is no, what I'm hearing is that there is no uniformity exactly. It's kind of, people can handle it differently, but there's not like a set that every school, every level, like, so 6 different elementary schools, is it possible that 6 different principals are handling the same incident differently? Is that possible because there's not a one flow chart type of thing to follow? I mean, is that fair to say, or are we
I think
all on the same page?
I think training helps, right? Get like more consistency, and like I was an English teacher and we aim for inter-rater reliability, right? Like, so that training part does help in the getting a more consistent response. The policy itself and the procedures give guideposts, but it doesn't dictate like, here's what you do first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So it's not fully laid out because every circumstance is different, but there are definite guideposts within the administrative procedure and the policy.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier, like restorative practices, but you talked a lot of it about being restorative between like the aggressor and the victim, right? Trying to either restore that relationship or restore their trust with those around them. I guess one of my questions is part of your follow-up kind of question earlier is there kind of touching base with both sides independently to either through a counselor or someone to kind of touch base and say, how are you feeling? Are these things that like individually restorative, not collectively restorative?
Yeah, I think that's always the best practice. We try and do that.
Okay.
Can I say it happens in every circumstance? I cannot.
Well, I mean, people, you gotta, I understand you gotta walk the line between kind of re-traumatizing someone, balancing them, if they're willing and accepting, but I think like the attempt needs to be made, in my opinion, you know, to go through that. And best practice, yes, and then whether they accept it or are willing is a different matter, so. Okay.
And I'm sure we can
Did-
always get better at that too, right? I think that follow-up is always.
So, I mean, to me, it sounds like this follow-up is, you're saying, Brad, it's best practice, and I get it, but it's not required or mandated. And I'm wondering if we should make a recommendation that that is part of this process and the flow, that it does happen every time.
And I agree with that. I think that's a good idea. I think I know personally I have some more questions. I'd like to understand certain parts of it. I think that might be a good idea based on what I've heard, just watching different board meetings before my time on the board, listening to everyone. It may kind of bridge some of the gaps that we're seeing as far as everyone comes from a different background, right? Different, I mean, even through a little bit of trainings, but we're not gonna all see one incident the same way necessarily. And I think it could center our victims a bit better if we do have something in place that's a little bit easier, no matter whose hands are on it. We're gonna go through and I mean, be mindful that every event is different, but there still should be something that we can kind of organize, for sure. Yeah.
So, kind of a request on that would be to kind of look at that practice, what would the, how would that kind of materialize, or what would that look like, kind of in a parlance, and then what, if any, since we have limited staff, with limited time and limited availability, what does that mean if there's any kind of financial implications of being able to do that? And I'm not putting price tags on things, I'm just saying we need to be aware of what the implications are.
Well, and this is one of, definitely so, but this is one of our biggest things, and when we look at our strategic plan, so much of this ties in. Like, I look at the very first opening statement of our policy: bullying, intimidation, harassment diminish a student's ability to learn and a school's ability to educate, preventing students from engaging in these disruptive behaviors and providing all students with equal access to a safe, non-hostile learning environment are important district goals. I would even say that should probably be updated, because those are our main goals, right, when we look at these things. So I think it would be, we voted on the strategic plan, this is part of it, so whatever money we know, once this goes in, I mean, I think that you'll see a lot of other gaps. This is a huge part, right?
Absolutely.
Kids being safe, feeling safe, being able to go to school and being able to be part of an environment is going to really, really improve in a lot of areas.
And maybe, Brad, we could make sure that we include that as part of a, maybe like the feeler with our stakeholder committees that we meet with prior to this coming back to the board.
I think that'd be good to hear from
You know what I mean,
the community.
the idea about the follow-up protocol.
Yeah.
We could kind of drop that for some feedback and see what the stakeholders feel.
Yeah, I would really like to know from kids, like, what kind of follow-up do they want? Or would they feel is most important to them?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think, you're right, you can't, make every, you know, if they don't wanna engage in it, then that's their right to do that, but I do think, I mean, for me, I do think it would be good to have a protocol where we are touching back with them 2 or 3 weeks, or whatever it is, just to see, you know, how they're doing, and, because you're right, I mean, if they go through the process and then it's completely unsatisfactory, they might not report future incidents because they feel like, well, what was the point? I went through all that, and nothing happened, or it's just as bad. And so there might be some kids falling through the gaps that are suffering. Again, I mean, maybe not, but maybe there will be. I have a hunch there probably is some.
We've been told that that has happened. We've had kids stand up there and say exactly that is what has happened. If you listen to their different stories, that is exactly what many have said. And so the question that goes along with that is, what do we do to follow up with the kids that do come and speak? You know, do we follow up with Lizzie? Do we follow up with her sister Alexis? Do we follow up with the people that we know are experiencing the bullying and follow through with them? Or are they coming and even speaking in public, reliving that trauma and getting no response? And to my knowledge, those kids have not received a follow-up. So what are we doing
So
with that?
I will provide you with the answer, and this is apologies on my part for not maybe coming back to the board on this, but our administrators did follow up with the students that spoke.
I heard directly from two of them that they were not followed up with. So that's, I'm not saying like, I'm not like a back and forth, but that was my question that I had is, so shouldn't we be following up with them to say, how is this working when we know that you've come and actually brought it to our attention? So like, are you doing better, right? And
I
like,
directly asked for a follow-up on it
Okay.
and was provided an executive summary of the follow-up meetings that took place. And this is part of the reason why I know we do involve our student services team members, because we had other people in those meetings and conversations to support any social emotional needs that might have come up from that.
okay, so are we talking about, you know, people who came and said that I care for kids and groups and kids? I have one who's sitting right here that I am familiar with who deals with children within the LGBTQ plus community, who said that those kids and their kids in Batavia are suffering. So those are perfect people for us to follow up with, right? To say, yeah, they're still,
Maybe
so
misunderstood.
the people who have come and spoken to us at meetings, right?
Yeah, are you talking about the agencies or the specific student stories?
All of the
that were-
above. I think
Oh,
anyone
okay.
that we should find that information valuable.
Okay.
I would, if I was looking to say, is this working? Is this bullying policy working? I think the first place I would think of starting are with the people who have come to publicly speak and say, hey, and like a lot of these people are representing not just themselves, but other students. And I'll call one out specifically is Martin Byrne, who is now graduated. They are a voice of many students. And so that one person alone can give you a wealth of information on what works, what doesn't work, not just for them, but for other kids who may be in similar situations. But so that was my wondering is like, you know, why are we following up with them? And if we aren't, shouldn't we be? And is that should be part of the policy of our loop back around, you know, making sure that our policies that are in place are actually working for people?
So I'm clear, you're saying that you talked to people that spoke that they weren't,
Followed
there
up
was
with.
no follow-up? And Tom, you're saying there was.
And I mean, it's not just this meeting, and we go back to the one, I remember, I mean, again, it's not, was it May of 2022? Where the rally had happened, and it was at the RMS. I mean, there were, I don't think people, for the most part, were followed up then, the people at least that I know. You know, so they're coming and speaking, so what comes of that? What does the board, or what does admin then do? What do they do after someone is coming and reporting that? You know, hey, I had this bullying incident, I did this, but there was no follow-through, or this failed me. So is that not part of this, you know, information that we should be reviewing and evaluating our policy on? And if we're not following back up with them or having those open conversations, then I don't know how we're doing.
I'm just a little confused here.
Well,
because
so
it's
I think I understand, because there was, like, so I wasn't here for 2022. I wasn't here, right? So I'm not 100% sure about that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 100% sure I'm not sure about that situation.
That makes
But,
sense.
right, this past May board meeting, you're absolutely right. We had various representatives from different agencies in our county or our region speak on behalf of some of the voices of students that they've had come through their agency, right? And then we had a couple of our own
Yes.
speak up. What
Yes.
I was referencing were those that were internal to us, that
Okay.
and to your point, I'm not aware of any administration, and I can speak about myself, I did not reach out to some of those agency groups that came and spoke. I'd like to think about that, I'm taking this feedback in right now and
Yeah.
talk to some of my team about that and process that.
Is it clear to those people? Because I'm just a little surprised that hearing from them, knowing some personally, like, were they confused that this was not a follow-up related to, where's the I guess where's that disconnect? And we don't need to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and
Yeah.
that was definitely be a conversation I'd like to take offline, cause
Yeah.
we're getting into like student records
Sure.
and student stuff,
Sure.
but I'm definitely open to having that conversation, and would
yeah.
like to follow up on that more.
Yeah, and I mean, no specifics, I guess my whole point is, talking about, as far as how do we know if things are working? And we do know that people are saying that it's not working, and so how do we get those voices? Well, we have different voices that are available to us, and do we need to change our policy where we do make sure that those kids are followed up with, or those
Yeah, so
individuals?
I think I'm gonna wordsmith a little bit, and potentially change our practice. Like, our policy says we need to do these things.
Okay.
Right, and our practice is how we kind of enact that policy and the things we do to support that policy.
Okay.
So like, does our practice need to shift?
okay.
To be able to help support that policy? So, I think
Got you.
Tom's basically saying, let's go back, let's look. I recognize the fact that from my position, I don't think people were. I mean, I've talked to the previous superintendent in the past and said, hey, if somebody comes to me and to the board and says something, I wanna know what happened afterwards. Like, I need a feedback loop, that if someone said something happened on a bus, then they came here to talk, at least tell me whether that was supported, that was investigative, what were the things that kind of occurred to that.
Yeah.
And that really didn't generally happen, right? And so I think that's something that we as a board can say, that's important to us as a board, that there is that. Now, what I think Tom wants to do is, like, when we start having organizations that come individually, making sure that we figure out a way to engage them in the process as a part of the practice is what you need to work on. I'm interested in what other districts do, because historically, most of the people that come speak at boards are listened to, but I'm not sure how much there's actually a real feedback loop there, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I'm curious as to how other districts might handle that as a way of understanding it, because in a lot of ways, it's advice given to us to take to say, okay, if it's important to us, then we'll give it to, that these are things we need to follow through. Clearly, something's, from varying people's opinions, is not working right.
Yeah, I mean, it's
So-
just, and I think that would help us as the board to know, is this something that needs to be, revisited, revised? But we're not going to know if we don't know exactly whatever happened,
I'm with
right?
you.
So I think that's like just for me, that's like a really easy place to start, because those people are vocal, they are reflecting and reliving their traumas, and I think at least that's the bare minimum that we can do at that point.
So we'll let Tom digest that information a little
Yeah,
bit.
go for it, yeah.
And figure it out, okay.
I just want to be clear on one point, though, is there were, if I remember correctly, 2 active students that came to the May board meeting. Am I correct about that? That gave feedback and shared experience?
4
Active students?
active students.
Okay, 4 active students.
Wait, is there more? Hold on, I remember 4 specifically. They were all active at the time.
Okay, so 2 or 4, let's say 4.
Okay.
Okay, 4 active students. Tom, did we follow up with those active student situations?
I'm aware of 2, so I need to take a look and go back now.
The intent was to follow up with any student.
Yeah.
And you will verify
Yes.
that they were.
Yeah.
And if not, we'll take a reasonable action associated with that. Okay. Good point.
So, I know that there's our policy is kind of with SB 100, kind of aligns with SB 100. Is that fair to say? So, I guess my question, because I read SB 100, and so they talk about the out-of-school suspensions of 3 days or less, may be used only if the student's continuing presence in school would pose a threat to school safety or disruption to the student's learning opportunities. And it says, the threat to school safety or disruption of the student's learning opportunities shall be determined on a case-by-case basis by the school board or its designee. And the designee says, it's the principal, dean, all that good stuff. So that one, and then also the one about suspensions longer than 3 days, expulsions, and disciplinary removals to alternative schools. Basically says the same thing. It to be pose a threat to the safety of other students, staff, members of the school community, substantially disrupt, impede, and interfere with the operation of the school, threat to the safety of the student, staff, members of the school community, and substantially disrupt, impede, and interfere with the operation of the school shall be determined by case-by-case basis by school officials. So I guess my question is, so that's what they say, right? It's, if they cause a disruption, threat, safety, and all that stuff. And so it says, the bullying may take various forms, including one of the following: harassment, threats, intimidation, stalking, physical violence, sexual harassment, sexual violence, theft, public humiliation, destruction of property, retaliation for asserting and alleging the act of bullying. So I understand that we have to do certain requirements from SB 100. But if it says, so that's what I guess it says on a case-by-case basis. This is how I'm reading it, is like, we don't necessarily have to do all of those. If it poses a threat to the safety of other students, staff members, school community, it disrupts, impedes, and interferes with operation of school, and, you know, like their, students' learning opportunities. So it's kind of like, okay, if I'm being bullied and they're threatening me, and we can do this as a case-by-case basis, and I understand we shouldn't have a zero tolerance, but do we ever take that into consideration? Like, hey, we investigated, this is a serious threat, we do not have to go through the interventions. You know, do we ever do that?
Yes.
The board took action on something this year, Brad, correct? On a student that resulted in an assessment that there was an imminent harm and posed danger to the entire building based on the activities that were being done, the misconduct. And the board took action on that particular recommendation. There was also a second recommendation that was conducted about a student situation that unfortunately in the end, we recommended an expulsion that was held in abeyance of a young student, and that also fell in line. But a part of that was, again, best practice, trying to remediate, trying to educate, trying to support the situation before we got to that point. So, yeah. So I'm just, the reason why I bring that up is, I guess I'm just trying to remind the board, we have unfortunately, even in my first year here, resorted to that level of consequence.
Has it ever been done relating to bullying, like,
It was not.
yeah, I know the
Right.
ones that we did, but has it ever, is?
That I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So this, I'm just kind of curious, like, and you know, that's what I mean, so it's like, it's kind of a case by, so that, I know that SB 100, you know, I know what people think of SB 100, so that's what I'm just kind of saying, is like, hey, should somebody, you know, after the investigation, look at it by a case-by-case basis and say, I think we need to go this route and not this route. I'm just, you know, because that's, to me, I'm not a lawyer, I don't write this policy, or I'm not a politician, but just like, I think that kind of gave them a little wiggle room on it, because it lets the school board or a school district determine on a case-by-case basis, if that makes any sense.
So one of those cases, I guess is your question, is one of those cases to the point where the ramifications are so kind of exigent and important and critical that you effectively say, we're gonna suspend the student for 3 days or longer or whatever because of the kind of criticality or nature of the situation, right?
Right.
And then kind of follow up with the investigation, I guess, if need be, but I would presume at that point, you almost have to like prove innocent, like you're affecting punishment before you've necessarily gone through the right steps. So I imagine a harder lens is pushed on that to do something like that, 'cause
Now, I'm sorry.
I'm asking a question more than anything.
Yeah, I do think, just so the board understands the spirit of how SB 100 got introduced in the state of
Okay, fair.
Illinois, it was a measure used actually from the state of Michigan, I believe, is where it was philosophy behind this came from. But the reason why I got adopted was to slow down and make districts really analyze who
Right.
you were expelling and punishing from school. Because there was a very specific set of demographics that the data was starting to show were being over-punished or over-identified. So the state moved SB 100 through, and that's part of the reason. So I hear what you're saying, but I just want to remember that the spirit of this was actually intended to do something else.
Right, to level the, I don't wanna say playing field, but I
No,
know what you're
it's-
saying. It's like to make sure that we are equitable in all of our punishments.
rational.
It asks districts to be reflective on your disciplinary
Right.
policies and what you as an organization might have as a blind spot in how you're handling student discipline.
Right.
Because I remember going to the DeKalb County ROE trainings on this when this was getting pushed as a building principal, and we were, as it was moving forward, and that was absolutely the intended spirit of what they were asking us to do.
Yeah,
We had to revisit everything.
Right,
Yeah, so I guess maybe it is an option. It could happen. It maybe has happened. Probably can't get too specific about that. But I think you gotta really take a very careful lens because of that spirit that you're talking about as to whether the nature that you put yourself and the other students in, that if that's a snap decision in the end more than a thoughtful decision, I guess, is the danger of it. I don't have an answer to you. I think it's a great question.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
I mean, I guess I'll add to that is, I know, so we're talking about expulsions, that's a pretty extreme, like, as a district, obviously we wanna protect all of our students, but expulsion is a very extreme
Right.
measure of discipline, which, it's been explained to me that it's changed in education that, I think they've studied the outcomes of students that are expelled, that they really sets them up for failure throughout their life, so if we can somehow mediate that or provide them therapy or treatment, I mean, that's not really where we're going. We never really want to go down that path unless it's like the last resort, right? Like you said, it's imminent danger to
Right.
them and the other students, so I think in the vast majority of cases, we're looking for less extreme measures, and I think what we're trying as a board to do is get consistency in policy from building to building and make sure that whatever our policy is, it's giving us the outcomes we want to get for both parties, I think. For the people that are getting bullied, that they feel safe, they can learn in a safe environment, and for the kids that are the offenders, that they understand the extent of what they've done, the damage they've done, and that they can learn that this behavior is not acceptable, and that they can learn more productive behavior so they can intermingle with their classmates and the faculty in a positive way. I mean, I don't wanna speak for the board, but that's kinda what I'm thinking.
Right, I mean, I don't wanna always expel, I'm not saying, but that was just on their SB. And I was talking, and actually, I mean, they also, again, I don't wanna expel anybody, but it says like the out-of-school suspensions of 3 days or less too, which I don't even know if we still do ISS. I don't know if we do it.
We do.
ISS doesn't usually rise to us though, right?
They could appeal it, yes.
So if they
So it
appealed
could.
it could, but generally speaking, it doesn't always get up to us at that.
Which is actually a really good reminder why sometimes, board, if you're wondering, why weren't we given some details or things of that nature ahead of time, and we're really careful about what we try and expose you to and not expose you to, is because sometimes in our policies, you are the appeal. And as the appeal, you have to kind of hit your eyes for the first time with those appeals and not have already some kind of prejudiced lens by information that we may have provided you in a different meeting or something to that effect. It's the same thing with me. They don't bring something to me if I'm the next appeal step, and then I kind of hear it out.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Yes.
Yes?
I don't, this is for Brad, I believe, or if you want to refer to someone else. Year over year, for years you've been in this position. How do you know if you're doing better at helping students or reducing bullying or harassment?
We look at our data, so within our data warehouse, there's.
What data is that?
So we look at all discipline data that goes into PowerSchool, which is your student record system. That we have access to. So we look at that data on a monthly basis to see, like, are we seeing more incidents? Are we seeing more incidents in one particular area, one particular school? We try and problem solve that with principals if that is occurring. It helps clue us into where we need more training, maybe for our staff. So that is something that we regularly review.
Are we doing better year over year?
I would say the pandemic we were seeing some progress, and then behaviorally, the wheels kind of came off during the pandemic, just to be very honest. And we saw a lot of extreme behaviors that we weren't seeing before. And we're just starting to see, I guess I personally underestimated the ripple effects that would have on our school community in terms of student behaviors. And we're just starting to see those kind of even out and making some progress again in that area.
What data can we have access to? We don't need that answered here, but I think that will help us all.
Sure.
Especially when trying to set goals and level set and find a base. I think I said this before, I would love to call out that just because the reports go down doesn't mean that the problem's being resolved. So there needs to be another measure, whether it's surveys or whatever. My other question on, or my other thought on, or my other question first, before thought, is what is the strategy that you all have to make sure students are aware of how to submit bullying reports? Is it the same at each school? Is it handled by the principal?
That's handled by the principals, and a lot of that happens, like, front-loaded in the beginning of the year, where they'll go over the student handbook and how to do those things. So they review the student handbook with students, and a lot of times those will come up during that time.
Okay, because I know, like, going through different schools, I've seen different signage. Some have things about it and some of them don't. I don't think it would be a bad idea to do an audit. Walk through the school, look for that specifically to see if it's there, if that's something we can do. And I'll just say one comment that is not an easy comment to say, but I think we need, this is just for me, and obviously we'll figure this out as a team, but I think that we need a lot more written down and visuals of what everything looks like from start to finish for a student, from start to finish for a parent, for faculty, all the ins and outs. I understand there's a lot of ebbs and flows in it. I understand that nothing follows a straight line, but there's a start and there's a middle and there's an end, or maybe there's not an end, like we were saying, continuous follow-up. But for us to be here and be like, what is, these questions, I feel like there's a lot of questions that we've asked that we, as school parents, should have known the answers to, not just as school board members. Like, what's the practice, what's the policy, how do we get to this? It seems like there should be pages and pages of information on all the different outcomes, all the different resources that faculty have, all the different resources that students have, tied up in a nice little bow, that's all. And I'm not solving the problem, I'm just saying what I think. So if you could do that, that'd be great.
Do you point at me?
Yeah.
So you did say that, was there a helpline that they can report it to, a hotline, or?
Do you want to talk about that, Tony, or?
Yeah, there is. To answer your question briefly, yes, there is.
K through 12 available for K through 12?
It's a statewide help hotline.
So then, just a thought is, I don't know how difficult or easy this would be, but maybe we just print that hotline on the ID cards, so kids have it available with, all the time. You know, I don't know how easy or hard it is, I don't know who does our ID cards, but just make it like on the template, you know, bullying hotline or whatever the hotline's called. That way it's all available, even, and I don't know if they have a website,
They do. They
you
have
know, you could
QR
maybe,
codes and text.
that's what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
you could even put like phone number, QR code right on there. Kids always have their phones. idea.
So I'd be kind of curious as a part of your kind of feedback loop process of finding out like people's ease of access or how they feel like, are they even aware that there's a phone number or a QR code or whatever else? Is there anybody else, I mean, probably you would feel about the same if hearing from people externally, students and teachers and others to find out what they're aware of, that options and resources even are out there.
Yeah, sure, if you're not having a problem, would you know what to do if you did?
Right, like I wouldn't have, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of signage that we posted, and we adopted the Safe to Help hotline, I would say, maybe 2 years ago, and
Yeah, I
there's,
see that around a lot of areas.
we post them most often if you're in the school restrooms, they're in there, because usually when,
Yeah, I've seen them there too.
when a student is respondent, that's typically where they go.
Twice I've ever been in a restroom in a school.
I think I've ever,
Yeah,
I think I've
not a
looked.
typical place.
So I have a question. So, you know, we just approved the strategic plan, and a big part of that was having measurable data, so we can measure how we're doing. So I think for me with this, it's kind of twofold. Like, obviously, we want to reduce the incidence of bullying, or be able to identify if there's like problematic buildings like the middle school or a certain grade school. But then I would think that we'd want some component, I'm not sure how you do this again, I don't have the answer, but like once people go through the process, like did it work for them, I guess, is what we have. Like, how do we evaluate if our process is working? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, because I imagine whenever something like this happens, there's one party that's always probably dissatisfied, because either you put in a submission for bullying and nothing happened to the person, or I didn't think I was bullying and I got punished. I mean, I know it's pretty complex. I mean, you're not gonna have everybody say, yep, this was fair usually.
No,
So
we're
I'm
not.
just trying to figure out how do you measure the effectiveness of our policy, if it's working or not?
I think part of it is coming back to something we talked about earlier is the idea about how are we checking in on our students, on the kids that are part of the situation. I really do agree with that sentiment. I also want to, Aaron, in response to something you just raised, we have to be careful too, when we're measuring the data. If we see a spike in reported incidences over the next 2 years, as a board, is that a good thing or a bad thing for you? Because,
Well, it
well,
could
it's
be,
kind of a rhetorical
if
question.
more
'Cause
people are aware of the policy now,
if,
so they're
yeah,
taking
that's what I was gonna
advantage.
say.
Great question.
The more awareness you raise, it is very possible you will actually see a spike in reported incidences. Now, to someone who's got that mindset of, well, now you got a really big issue in Batavia. Or are we really actually just providing an outlet for people to seek help?
And feel comfortable.
And now the
doing
number
so.
has gone up because we have made a different type of intentional campaign to put them on IDs and get more parent awareness, et cetera, right? So I just want to be careful that as we talk about where improvement and success is being made, I do think on this particular topic, just this, that student voice might be really important, right? You know, because how do parties feel after it's been resolved? Or, well, I don't know why there's such an echo on this microphone, but they're, you know, yeah, where have people landed? Are they better? What has happened? Were both parties open to going through some kind of process to heal that relationship and what's happened? You know, again, as Brad pointed out, that is ideal, and I've gone through restorative practices training and restorative justice training, and you know, in my previous district when we did that, it was always very clear by the trainers. When you have both parties not willing to sit together, you still want to find ways to educate and support, right? But the most ideal situation is that they're able to kind of sit together and understand what happened and kind of work through that, and then they may not become friends, but at the very least, they've learned and grown from that experience and can move forward. Right?
One of the things you brought up that always kind of raised a point with me a bit is, you know, people come to us and talk. And it's difficult for us sitting up here with the level of information that we get, right, to know are those individual problems or is this endemic? Like, is it all over the place? Because we probably won't make everyone happy all the time. We won't resolve everyone all the time. And so it's hard for us to know the people that came to speak, is that just that it wasn't resolved to their liking, and yes, there were people that happened, and that doesn't mean we don't go reach out and touch, talk, and everything else to them to try to continue that discussion and that resolution, but are we making progress on other things, and are we trying to do to, because it's difficult to know if something's broken by 3 or 4 voices. Now, these organizations that come talk, that's a bigger hint to me, right? You know, that something is truly amiss.
I think if you're having someone come and speak to you, you should have a pretty, to me, it's an indication that there's a systemic issue. More than likely, they're not unhappy with, your victim is not going to come up and relive their trauma just because they got an answer they didn't.
I agree that they have a higher level of, let's say, credibility, for lack of a better term right now, because they were brave enough to come up and talk, and they feel it's an important enough issue, and that there's enough support below them that, I'm not saying it's like an individualized issue per se, but it's to help us understand a bit of the breadth of it is, okay, we had 472 of these items, we feel we successfully resolved 389, you know, we're making progress toward these, that kind of thing might help us understand the extent of the issue is all I'm kind of saying. It also keeps the tendency for people to excuse those that come talk to the board members, oh, that's just one person. You know, it gives some credence to them if that is in fact a bigger issue, because we really know, well, it would be or not, so. Any other items on this topic for discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Real quick, a comment, just to follow up on something Tom was just saying is, and this is something I've thought about, is we have these incidents that occur, and yes, we're talking about, you know, how we deal with them and what the process is, but I'd like us to think about more about, how we as a community learn from these, and I know it's, I'm gonna echo, I don't have an answer to this issue or this question, but when we have these incidents, in order to, you know, prevention, you know, to learn as a community, how do we take these negative situations, learn from them, and hopefully that will help to prevent it from happening by getting education awareness out there. So, and I know we may already do some stuff, I'm sure, but just how to turn these negative incidents into positive learning opportunities for the community.
I was gonna say with the educational piece, that talking about more, seeing an uptick possibly in data, the more educated you are as a community, the more able we are to identify things. We have kids who have no idea, they're not, I mean, every family should do their process the way that they see fit. Not everyone's going to talk about racism. Not everyone's going to talk about, you know, homophobic slurs and stuff like that. So I mean, if we don't know about them necessarily or know that they're happening, we may not have the tools ready to actually identify those things. Kids are going to school not understanding necessarily, I'm hearing this and this isn't okay. And so we ask for bystanders to report incidents, but if we're not educating our community, our kids, our parents, actually to what is harmful, what is bullying, you know, what is biased behavior, then, you know, we probably aren't going to see everything reported as it should be. So if we are educating more, which is a great thing, we may definitely see those numbers go up. And to Rob, to your point, I know it's been talked about previous to even us being on the board, is do we reach out to community? So when we have incidents that happen, let's say, I'm gonna use one that is non-victim specific. So a swastika, let's say, is drawn on a wall. And whether or not it's 50 students that see it or 10 students, do we notify the community of that? And say, because then maybe there should be education that goes out. Or if we are seeing an uptick in racism, do we send out something to grade levels, to schools, specific schools, or is it district-wide related to that? Or as hot topics come up in the world, you know, that politics or other heated things, and we know that things are happening, like Tom had sent out some information regarding some of the conflicts, and I think that's always great, so that you have the education. So I don't think it was ever decided, what does that look like, and do we do it? Do we all agree with educating our community with age-appropriate resources, and what does that look like? I don't think there's ever a downfall to that. And yes, it will probably bring up some discussions and some fears, but I always think that's better than it being misinformation out in the community, people making assumptions, the story varying. It doesn't mean that you have to give details or private information. I think there's ways to go about that so that we are educating and people are knowing that it is happening in Batavia, and we can have a community-based approach about it, to it. Do we do that? Like, is there something that actually, are there steps we follow, I guess? Or is it just, is that something that we do on a regular basis? Do we have anything in place?
There's conversations that we do have about that, and then we have, again, some like criteria, so we look at what is the nature and reach of the event, right? Like how many people saw that, what was going on. Confidentiality is a big piece that you have to take into consideration when communicating more widely. Sometimes you're in the middle of that investigation about who did it, reviewing videos, so is the investigation ongoing? And then sometimes we need, like, to drum up witnesses too, right? Like, same thing, like the police, I'm sure they have similar guideposts about, like, if they communicate about a crime. So, like, do we need people to step up and tell us what they saw? Those are some of the guideposts that we use for whether we're gonna communicate more broadly about an incident that's happened within the schools.
To me, it seems like, this is just anecdotal, it seems like we shared that when there is like a police report generated. And then that usually seems like there is something shared by the district, and if it doesn't rise to that level, I mean, there might have been instances where we shared, but I can't really remember a lot where. we
Well, I think a
proactively
police
pushed.
report, though, we have to be mindful of the fact that that's dealing with adults. You know, we're dealing with students and minors. So in that respect or that regard, we have to be a little more careful, right? Because even the police reports don't include minors. They don't report on that. So, I get what you're saying. I just think,
I'm not advocating, I'm just saying it seems like when we have done it, it's kind of been that level of trespass or.
So is there no, if we're seeing, like, if we're data, we have part of our, strategic plan is to have our dashboard, and let's say we are definitely backed by some data, and we're noticing that there is an uprise in certain hate speech or just behaviors. Could we not say, like, hey, this is a great time for an email to go out, say, hey, this is a reminder, community, that we take a strong hand against racism, we need a strong stance, and here are some educational resources and age appropriate. So it's not necessarily, this is what happened, da, 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 if that's not something we're all comfortable with. I mean, at the very least, what about something like that? I just think giving parents resources and the knowledge that things are happening is much more powerful than not. I think more of our community have voiced that they would rather understand that things are happening. I mean, as a parent, I'd rather know, like, do I need to have different conversations with my kids? And not everyone wants that, and you don't have to have those conversations, but to have that ability.
Are you talking about like a specific communication that is the sole topic of the communication?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it needs to look like. I mean, I'm just kind of throwing.
see, and I think that's a perfect case of, like, it's hard to define it, right? It's hard to draw the picture right now because every situation could be somewhat different. We don't know what would happen, right? And sometimes, like, this is where sometimes I lean on Holly's expertise, right? And, I will lean on her and say, hey, what would be really appropriate? Or, we had a very unfortunate situation happen in the first semester at one of our buildings, and we did send out broader communication with age-appropriate resources and asking parents, if you're don't know how to tackle this conversation at home and you notice your child is struggling with this, here's some links that you can consider using. We also had set up on-site support for families and for students and for staff. And, Holly worked with our building administration to support what the communication should look like, right? So I think it also depends on the degree.
Yeah, because we've done that when we've had
So-
faculty pass away. I know we've done that before where it was traumatic to the.
Right.
I think it's a reasonable lens to put on kind of like every incident, right? Is there an avenue or an aspect here that is either rises up to a level of kind of a consistent issue we're having, or that there's a consistent problem, or it's severe enough that it requires of that? You know, I think that would be a reasonable kind of a lens to take a look at to say, okay, based on our judgment, is this trending in a wrong direction? Is this important enough, and can we frame it in a way to be an educational component as an issuance to the community at large?
That's kind of where the data piece comes in it for me a little bit.
Yeah.
Is so that we're not, so we can kind of see how things are trending. So if it was really getting to be a significant, like, okay, we're seeing a certain uptick in one sort of type of thing, then that would give us a lever to kind of like recognize it first of all, and then we have a different kind of discussion.
To even know what you're addressing.
Even know what we're addressing, right,
Frankly.
yeah.
Well,
I think one of the frustrating things, parents, is when there is something that happens at the school where, like, there's a, racial slur or hate speech written on the bathroom wall, and then you get the email from the school saying, hey, there was an incident, this, that, we are currently investigating. And I just always was like, okay, well, I don't need to know specifics, but did you guys come up with an outcome? Was there an outcome?
So a follow-up email?
Yeah, and I can understand due to privacy laws, like, I don't wanna know students' names, I just wanna make sure, like, that you actually did do the investigation, and if you couldn't resolve it because of, if it's in the bathroom, obviously you're not gonna have cameras in there, but just like, hey, we did look into it, unfortunately, we can't say what was happened, but we did look into it, and continuing or something. That was, I always felt, to be honest, one of the, frustrating parts. It's like, well, how do I know you guys did it?
well, the other challenge is kind of a message game, right? A bit. So like, when those don't go out, they get out on Facebook, they have those things, and then the cult of misinformation
Right.
on every side pops up, and nobody knows what to believe anymore, and facts get misrepresented. So that's the other component to think about as these things, sometimes getting out to state the facts is better than not stating them at all.
Right.
So,
I think that's where a lot of the feedback comes. Like, I would just rather know that you're aware of this and that it's not the image that is just being swept under the rug. Like, that's not what's happening, we're acknowledging that this happened, and, you don't have to give specifics. I don't think people are necessarily asking, like, what did you do? Who was it? But I think people just generally want to know, like, you are addressing this. And with that knowledge, I mean, that allows education. At the home level, that allows education that's needed from other students. Again, if students are understanding that this was not okay, this is something that is not accepted, a lot of things do happen out of pure ignorance and not knowing that using the N-word has an effect on people the way it does. And so I think with having that, I don't see a downfall to informing our community, and maybe I'm missing something, but I think that's where a lot of that goes wrong, and you have a lot of misinformation when we don't communicate. So when we're talking about data, I do have questions about data. I know we can't necessarily like spell it all out, but one of my concerns when you talk about the dashboard and data is that I guess the confidence and the fact that we are getting reports in, and I guess a better understanding of what the data is. So like, does it track, this is a racist incident, this is a homophobic incident, this is an incident, and then the aggressor, this is a instant aggressor. Is this something that is not victim specific? Do we keep data on that and it counts towards different incidents?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know if it's broken down specifically by the type of, what's the right way to codify this? Like,
Category?
yeah, like,
Right.
we have it, we have the data broken down by, also disaggregated by race and Brad gender as well, right?
Their
As we report it to the
economic
state.
status.
Yeah.
By who's reporting and who's,
Brad, would you mind explaining that data component a little bit further?
so we like, so we have like a demographic data. So are we over-reporting certain students as bullies, or is that what we're talking about? So we can track that?
Yeah.
If certain populations are getting over-identified, possibly?
but not necessarily based on a categorization of like what was said.
What was the
Yeah.
incident?
So how do we know there's like a
Is this a
specific
homophobic
issue?
comment? Is this a racist comment?
Yeah.
Is this?
Like, not to talk politics, but we know that there's going to be an uptick in, like, coming November, right? And so are we going to see more sexist, incidents? Are we going to see more, whatever? I mean, so how do we know?
So that's the part I think is, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't codify it to that level of specificity, correct? In Power School?
Can we, or
But
should
we
we say we
ha-
shouldn't?
No, we don't have that, but we do have, like, anecdotally, the administrators and student services teams that are working on those kinds of situations when those instances occur, how they're handling it. It's kind of anecdotal, I suppose, I guess is the best way to put it, like because we don't specifically say, like, to your example, hate speech surrounding politics, or, we don't have those categorical systems, because the student data collection system isn't like an open text field box in how we collect our data, because part of that collection has to go to the state,
Right, right.
so,
And they don't collect it, to that degree of categorization?
not to my knowledge, I know out of school suspension time, race and gender are some of the data fields. Brad, am I missing any of the big ones?
So like when I was looking at, is it HB 30, the one that says that we have 24 hours to notify families? Shoot. Let me see if I've written down really quick. Just hang on.
Are we tracking just
You'll
if
find
we've
it.
done that
Do,
time?
do, do, do.
Do we actually track that, Brad? Like,
What's that?
we notified within 24 hours, we completed within 10 days?
It's HB 3425, just to put it out there.
So we do collect, so I have, like, the report we shared with board in closed session. We do have a data chart that showed you the bullying incidences that were occurred based on the protected classes. So race, gender, sex, religion. And so we broke it down by buildings, the infractions that were reported. So for example, in 23-24, that was 47. And it was broken down by also, language proficiency, low income, special education status, and race.
So they're tracking like the people who are victims and the people who are doing it, are they, I'm still confused, are they tracking the type of incident? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because that's what my understanding of that bill is, so that people, so a parent guardian can contact ISBE and ask for the data on a district. And that's part of that bill, so I wasn't sure through that, I didn't look into it more, but like, what does that include? Is that gonna tell each person that there was this many racist incidents and this many, against religion and this many against that? So it sounds like yes? Okay. Thank you.
Just not individually broken down within those protected classes. I think we would have to hand filter
Oh, so how
that
many?
particular part. So it's a collection of anything that's been identified as an incident regarding religion, race, disability, sex, gender, identification, and sexual orientation.
But not specifically.
But then not disaggregated within there. Now, that's the aggregated number under those protected classes of incidences that were reported. Does that make sense?
So how would we know if things are getting out of hand in a specific area, data-wise? Would we? Can we?
Well, that is still though a totality of the report from those protected groups' classes.
I guess the question is, right, is there a value, right, in knowing what type that is? And I guess from
Thank
your
you.
perspective, yes, there may be, because then you can kind of target your educational campaign
Yeah,
directed toward one specific
right,
section that
Okay.
seems to be
right, like if we're seeing
taking
like
off
a
a bit
right.
higher than one would expect,
Right,
then we need to educate people on, gender identity or
Right.
whatever else. Okay.
100%.
Let me have time to process with my team then.
Okay,
We'll take a look at it.
I was curious, so yeah. I'm not giving action because we are not deciding on that,
No,
but
no,
I just,
no,
I'm
no.
curious.
I think we've all agreed, this is kind of a conversation, right?
Yeah,
So, okay.
Okay, and with that data question, just to elaborate on, does that include our instance of, again, like an N-word written on the atrium brick, or a swastika, or just in general, it's not specific to a person, but we're having someone, you know, spewing hate speech, which may affect students? Are we keeping track of those incidents, and how is that tracked?
Like, are you talking about non-victim specific,
Ye-
like someone defaces something?
Someone defaces something, see, and this is the hard part. It's not like student A called student B this name. It's student A, yeah, maybe they wrote a slur on the wall. Maybe they were screaming out, like a student had said, I think that they were calling Muslim students bombers in the hallway. And so, I mean, that could and really leak down to a number of students, but it's not specific student against this one student. Do we track that, and is it tracked the same way? Are we doing a report on it? Because it's not one person reporting it as bullying necessarily.
Yeah, most of our data collection is student-specific, so like if a student is involved in that situation, whether they're getting a consequence for that, that's the type of data collection we do. Maybe not as,
Not as, so,
it's hard for me to visualize that, but probably like if something like there was no victim, but it was like an impact on school culture or something like that.
yeah, so like if you
I
have a.
don't know if they would track that necessarily
Okay.
in our student information system, because everything's very student-specific.
So as a district, do we not track that? Do we not know how many times students have defaced like a bathroom wall, writing this word or that word? Do we not know?
I don't know, but
Okay.
I'll have to ask around.
Yeah.
I'm looking at all of the data, just really quickly, and I'm not gonna give out any numbers or anything. but
Okay,
Discipline incidents by type is reported.
okay.
I'm looking here, and there's probably, what, Steve, 40 different answers of what that type is. From cafeteria violation, bus violation, computer violation, dress or grooming, drug violation. There's and including property damage, property misuse, and vandalism are all listed as options. Then you can click on any one of those types and drill down by school, by grade, by type, by individual, like, it's all very available.
So like a bus, let's say a bus one, it can be down to, so the student, you know, what school they go to and that, and is it saying that this was a racist incident?
So
It may or may not.
I click on that, and then it will show us how many by school, by grade level, by race, by week of the month. How action counts, which is the consequences, after school detention, so how those incidents were handled. If it was a conference, in-school suspension, after-school detention, then on a bus. If they were low income or
Demographics.
non-low income, all like broken out by demographic.
Do we have anything that you collect on that? So I hear by discipline, but do we do it by victim as well? No. I guess where I'm falling, I'm like, I feel like there's like a gap, so then how are we serving the needs? Or knowing what the needs are if we're not able to see the big picture of everything? I don't know if I'm verbalizing that correctly.
You say you don't know the big picture.
Well, the big picture being, so we have more discipline, right? Let's say bus issues, but are we knowing that these are, I'm just gonna go to that, let's say the N-word, because it's just like the easiest example, but using that, and acknowledging that we are seeing more and more of it. Or I don't think that we have anything that's tracking the actual number of times that's happening on a bus that is reported. And then you can narrow it down to like elementary or middle school, whatever you want to do, but we're not able to say this was racist, this was against someone's identity, this was against their religion. We don't have that data. So when people are saying that they are being bullied for various reasons, we don't truly understand if we have a dilemma, if we don't have the data to actually process that. I'm confused, okay.
Well, I think
I'm
that's,
not confused.
I think that's what, that Tom was saying, he was gonna kind of go back and digest with the team.
Okay.
Because I think that's, is that something we can potentially split out?
Right.
Or it's arduous to split out, and what does the implications, or what does it take to do that?
I just don't think we can understand without it. I mean, so do other districts not go
I'm
without
not-
it?
Yeah.
Right, like,
Yeah, I'm not arguing whether.
I know
I'm
you're
I'm
not.
not stating at this point whether I think it is or isn't.
yeah,
How do we handle that, and how do we progress through that? I
right.
see your point, right? Like, how do you,
Like, we have no idea then, we have no idea of the number of incidents that happen, I'm just gonna use Bertolo, that involve hate speech, that involve, like, a bias to the degree of really harming fellow student members. We have no measurement of that in our district at this point, is what I'm hearing. So,
yeah.
that's worrisome in the fact that we can't control bullying if we don't even understand what the problem is. We can't address it and have solutions. I mean, we can definitely put a policy in place to maybe start that way, but I guess maybe it's a missing piece, I don't know.
okay.
I think for one thing, for me, I'm hearing all this, and this is a lot, we're having a pretty broad discussion, but like one thing I'm not really clear on is like, how do we define if we're doing well or not? Like, I'm not naive to think, I mean, I guess the goal is that you never have, like, everyone's aware of the bullying policy and no one chooses to exercise it because we never have an incident. That's probably not reality. So kind of what I'm trying to figure out is like how, like we have report cards that kind of measure like how we're doing. And I'm trying to figure out like, I mean, it's pretty complex, like Tom said, like if we increase awareness of how to report, then we probably will see a spike.
Yeah.
And so like I'm trying to figure out like how we as a board can measure, you know, if we're improving, if we're doing better, because technically like next year we could raise awareness, have a more clear policy. We're doing better because more people are getting reporting and getting needs addressed. But at the same time, if you just look at it in isolation, the numbers are going up.
I think that we don't look at it in isolation. I think if we have the data that can specifically, it'll be a little bit more specific perhaps, or a little bit more helpful for those needs. But we're also checking in, and maybe that is through our discussions of the follow-through, you know, I don't know what the time frame is, but the check-in with students. Did this work for you? Do you feel safer? Do you, whatever the case might be, which we're not necessarily following through every time. You know, so that follow-through along with the data, along with like, you know, the things that we're already supposed to be doing every 2 years, I think would give us a really good understanding of how we're doing. And like, people are saying, I'm safe, but the incidents
Yeah.
are going up then.
And I think, you know, part of the reason why I'm saying I want to digest this and kind of circle back to some of our teams is because, as you've heard, we're adopting Panorama as our new self-reporting SEL mechanism survey, right? Where students will now report on where they feel they are in terms of school safety, their own well-being, et cetera. And if you recall, board, that was being self-reported only by our high school age students. Students who were younger than that was being reported by the teachers completing it on their behalf. So I think we're gonna see a pretty dynamic shift in some of the reporting data. But I wanna this is where I wanna come back to Brad and I connecting with some of our teams that have done this work and that student services team to understand specifically any of these components that might actually fit what you all are talking about. Because there could be already, we used Panorama in my last district, I'm sorry, it's not the work that I was directly touching, but I would always see the end product survey and results of that work, because it would get reported out of cabinet, and et cetera. So I'm just trying to recall if we had some specific indicators there that were part of that, but again, this is something that I've taken some notes on that we can take a look at here. Because it might actually give you that point of reference as to whether or not improvements are being made. Because if we can take a look at what students literally are saying to us, that might actually be what you are looking for. Right? I mean, because that's what we were talking about earlier, where it's really coming down to the student's voice on how we understand whether or not we've been making some gains for kids who are in these situations. So, yeah.
I mean, I would also be interested in data on the kids that are accused of bullying, if we're doing restorative practices so their behaviors are improving as well, rather than, only the kids that are getting bullied. Like that's the other component of it, I think, because we want, both sides of it, I think we want to
every kid's safety and well-being is a priority. I think we just need to make sure we're focusing on centering the victims. And I think when you do that, it's going to bleed outwards to ensure that we're touching on that. Because in essence, I mean, most bullies, their needs are not being met for sure. And maybe through that educational piece, having more open discussions and different practices are helpful for that as well. But right, yeah, I mean, every student needs to be taken care of. It just doesn't seem right now that it's centering the victim when we're not looping back or we're not collecting data on them to just kind of like see our, what is the word I'm looking for? Like, I don't know, my brain's fried right now. To see like our, how things are like progressing. Yeah,
Progress monitoring?
I don't know, yes, yes.
That we're heading in
Want
the
some
right
coffee?
direction.
Thank you, yeah, yeah. No, I'm thinking of a lot of different things at one time, so sorry.
All right.
Danielle, do you have anything?
So what are we, I guess, I don't know how much I want to take up more time. I mean, this is very important, so are we coming back? Let me go through my questions, because maybe we might have already gone through a lot of them. One of the things I don't think that we've talked about is regarding have a zero tolerance stand on policy. I know we've talked about that with School Well 100, and I'm not talking about zero tolerance like you're out of school, but do we feel like we have an effective statement to our community, to our students, to our parents, whether it's in the student handbook, that specifically spells out like this is not going to be tolerated? Or I don't know that we can have specifics like, 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out. I don't think we can do that, right? So do we feel that our policy is very, very clear that this isn't just like, oh, this is bad behavior? I mean, this is like a no-go. This is zero tolerance. We do not allow this in our schools. And I don't know now that we do. I feel like it's like tiptoed. It's like, oh, that might be bad, right? But like, no, this is
Saying zero tolerance without it actually being zero tolerance.
I
of
guess.
The
a
kind
very
of
clear stance.
package around the issues surrounding that and the luggage that statement brings.
Yeah.
On a negative side, don't get me wrong, so I think that's a good question as it results kind of from the strategic plan reviewing our policies.
Yeah.
To say, is that supported enough in that question for that group that might be looking at that? I think it's a very reasonable question to say, is the statement affirming enough within that initial kind of inclusive statement you read from the strategic plan at the beginning of this discussion?
Right. I mean, because it gives a definition of bullying, which, I think there might be a couple pieces missing, but it's very specific on like, what that includes, and where it can't happen, like what's considered school property and all of that. But I don't know that it's like super clear that it's something that is going to be called out, let's say. I mean, we ask kids to report it, and what I hear from kids is like they're afraid of that retaliation. In our policy, it talks about students not receiving retaliation. But I mean, I've heard from students and staff that they feel retaliation when they do report things. And so oftentimes when kids are hearing things or people are hearing things, they're not reporting it because of that. And I think that if we have a stronger stance, and it's very clear, and we have that type of community language and that education, maybe that falls together. But right now, it's kind of like people are like, oh, maybe that is bad. I don't know, but it's not super clear from my understanding. And especially, again, you're not going to have a culture of people standing up against it if it's not super strong and they're afraid of that retaliation. And I don't know how we address that piece either. Because more often than not, students are not reporting what they're hearing and what they're seeing because they're afraid that their peers are going to retaliate. Or they're going to report it and then nothing's going to be done. And so maybe that's a different topic, I don't know, but I think that kind of goes into having a very clear policy and stance so that people know what the expectations are.
Okay.
I don't know if that's so much a policy thing, I think that's a culture thing.
But shouldn't we
gotta
have it
build
as a
that
statement?
trust. I mean, yeah, given you have the right statement in there, effective statement, but even with that, unless you have the right culture where they feel safe,
Yeah.
then it won't the statement won't matter.
Do you think if we effectively are able to adopt some very, like, you know, some more improved procedure and kids are feeling like they are reporting things that's being heard, things are being done, do you think that that would improve over
Yeah,
time?
that's a culture.
Well,
and we
I
gotta
think
change
that's the
that
culture thing you're
Yeah.
talking about, is if this touchback feedback loop that we're talking about creates an environment that they feel better, it won't matter what we write in the strategic plan or in our policies or mission statement.
Well, and that goes back to something Thomas said, where that relationship's gotta be there between the students and somebody at the school that's an adult, where there's trust,
Yeah,
that they could go there and that's a safe space and that it will be followed up on it.
I think, like, the one I think about specifically is like a student did go to a teacher, but that teacher wasn't in charge of the investigation. And we heard about that from a board email, and I, obviously for privacy reasons, I won't say what the student is, but it brought more trauma than the actual incident, because the member of faculty that handled the investigation was like, yes, I can see where that can kind of be like not so good words to use. Very much minimized the incident, so when we talk about that, we perhaps need to ensure that it's, the follow-through is done by that trusted individual,
Well,
right?
I think that's what Brad was also talking about earlier, there's a component of staff training that's gonna potentially go on to help make that a little bit more effective than it seemingly has been in the past.
Yeah,
So, letting see those strategies play out a little bit and see what that does.
mm-hmm,
So, seems like a step is being taken.
that's great. Okay, discussion, you walked us through, I think these are asking what we do. So is there usually education for the aggressor and their family when incidents happen? Did anyone ask that? I'm sorry if that's repetitive. But do we educate the aggressor and family in any sort of way?
I would say we absolutely try to.
Okay.
I know that our teams try to.
Okay. And is there any recourse for the victim or aggressor if they are unsatisfied with how things are handled or what the outcome is?
Can you repeat that last one?
Is there a recourse? So like if the victim or the victim or the aggressor is not happy with how something is handled, are they able to, what happens at that point?
Is there like an appeal process or
Mm-hmm.
something?
I think that's when the appeal process will start to occur.
So from the aggressor, there's an appeal process.
Okay.
right? I think this feedback loop we've been talking about is a better route potentially of addressing from the victim's side their continued kind of care after the event.
There's nothing in place though, specific, like
It
protocol-wise
sounds like there
procedure.
is, but it was like a best practice thing, and we're talking about kind of codifying that a bit more potentially.
Okay, I don't know if we can get into this because it might be too specific, but how and what discipline is decided? Do we base this on type of events or whether or not this is a repeat aggressor? So I'm guessing yes, that we handle things different based on that. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Well, this is not the last time we will ever talk about this, I'm sure of that, so, I like, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I'm not saying this is, so the conversation will be ongoing, and I think there's a lot of things related to other components of the strategic plan and policies that need to be, kind of have this lens, so I appreciate everybody's time and effort to.
So just so I know, so Tom, I know you were taking a lot of notes, so like, what are the follow-up,
That's fair.
like, what's the next action steps after this discussion that you wrote down? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, I have collected, I think, the entire list of questions and follow-up discussion items that have come through our conversation here. So like I said, I'd like to kind of just sit down and unpack that a little bit
Okay,
with the
that's fair.
administrative team.
Yeah.
There are some specific questions that were asked, and I think that are kind of like the technical aspects of our operations. You know, like some specific questions were discussed about what can we do about data collection and the type of data and can we disaggregate that, right? So that's really technical stuff that I'd like to get with building leaders and Brad and I talk, and then we talked about like the panorama survey. I raised actually that, and as a response to some of the discussion the board had about, you know, how do we chart a roadmap of success? You know, like how do we determine that, right? So I'd like to see us follow up and talk a little bit about that, what kind of data we're gonna be collecting, because it is important. We're gonna be, you know, as a board, there is gonna be a conversation coming about our data dashboard. there's actually some decision-making that I'll need you to give me guidance on. Holly and I have had some conversations, and she's done some great work on putting together some options for the board to consider, and we'll bring that to you when it's an appropriate time for you to have that conversation with us as administration and make that decision. So I think these are really good talking points. Helps us kind of think about what we're looking at, what we're looking for, excuse me. So yeah,
For accountability of the board, you know, again, if we're in breach of this policy, in my opinion, and maybe that's not correct technically, but if January of '22 was the last time, and we're supposed to do this every 2 years and update things, we're past that point. So what does the timeframe look like for us as a board, you know, to have another discussion on this? I don't necessarily just want to table it and see what happens. I mean, so what does our plan of action look like at this point? Because I'm not really clear.
I think we'd be good, Brad, to know what your timeline is for being able to do the feedback loop that is required. We need to find the board member that would be working with you or being a witness to that process, let's say, just like as an advisory level that we have on our other committees. But I don't know that timeline yet, and I don't know whether you don't know. Are we actually in fact delinquent on that yet or not? Not that you're aware of.
Maybe, I don't
Okay.
know. I think we need to continue that process.
Regardless of the
Yeah.
current state.
however, keep in mind, the new updates in the legislation on bullying just went into effect right now, like 2 weeks ago. So
Okay.
I don't want you, it's important, and I appreciate the sense of urgency we need to have around it, but you have to understand, this work takes time. I mean, he's gotta create some feedback loops as part of
That
the
didn't exist
process.
before.
That needs to happen before you're even allowed to start kind of weighing in as a board yourself on this particular policy.
So for us to have conversations as far as to, you know, whether I wrote down some of the items, you know, as far as a flow chart, you know, protocol touchback, you know, and the check-ins with students and how we communicate to community. Can we not do that until this point happens?
Oh, no, I'm not saying that. I think that's. a
So
fair
then why are
question.
we, I don't know,
I
understand
didn't
why.
say we were. I said that's part of what I think we need to do to figure that
It's-
out.
yeah.
When to tooth it in.
It sounds like for the voice of the student, staff, family, and all that to be done on the part that we're supposed to be doing, that would be a smart way to utilize that, but, I mean, this is urgent. I came here anticipating a conversation, but are you guys comfortable with not just putting it off on the back burner? Or should we ensure that we're going to, make movement on some of these issues?
Doesn't feel like it's on the back burner to me. Feels like they have a plan.
What's the plan? I guess I don't understand. I know that there's gonna be conversation with community.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Is that not the plan?
That's not gonna, I don't think that's,
My understanding is we're incorporating that feedback to help us refine policy, right?
And there's some things that Tom needs to digest.
So if
Yeah.
we were
To
to,
figure that out, that's component number 2, is all of the items that were part of this
so
discussion.
what is the timeline for this?
I don't know Tom, are you able to kind of establish, like, at the next meeting, could you come back and
We
give
can
some
bring an
input?
update back to the next board meeting.
I mean, it's gonna take time, right? It's gonna take time. We need a first reading, second reading.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure at that point we'll get to a policy yet. I don't know that yet, but I think an update at the next meeting is entirely reasonable to say, okay, these are the things we can act now, these are the things we need to do, and these are the next steps.
Yes.
Is that reasonable?
Yeah.
Yes,
bring
I
some
wasn't hearing
answers.
that part, yeah,
Yeah, I would
yeah.
like to bring some answers back to the questions that we can
Yeah.
try and address.
I understand things will take time, but I just wanna make sure,
Absolutely.
How much time?
Things keep moving.
well, that we're progressing, yeah.
Yeah, things keep moving, that's
Sure.
fair.
When you look at what we have here, we need to make sure that we are swiftly doing things in a
Yeah,
careful manner.
Yeah, the presumption from at least my part was I wanted to give Tom a chance to be able to
Yeah.
figure out how long he needed to respond to, because there was a lot discussed today that will have
Absolutely.
potentially, and it's, in my opinion, it's okay to say, these are the things I do, and these, at the next meeting, and these are the things I need more time on.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Tom? Okay.
Makes sense.
I'm good to go.
All right, the second topic of conversation was exit interviews. So that's something that was brought up a while ago, as we were working through with people kind of resigning, retiring, leaving, whatever their case may be. But if there's a kind of a formalized process for understanding why people leave. Is that a reasonable summary of what the discussion was at one point in time? So I think there was some questions to what that might look like, what the ramifications are, because there's 3 people or so that deal with that work with how many employees that we have in the district? 400 and, is it 800, 700? Yeah, 800, that's what I thought, yeah. So how do we fit that within the capabilities, and are there additional resources needed to be able to manage that dependent on what we would be looking at? So, Tom, you had looked at other options of how to do, how does that look, like exit interviews? Is it purely interviews? Is there?
Yeah, no, it's, Steve and I have actually had some of these conversations along the way, because the glide path on this is, it actually fits one of our strategic plans components, right, as one of the priority areas. We've talked about, finding a good model of some form of a survey that can be pushed to people when there's a notification, and that would then collect a data warehouse for us to use.
Bless you.
Steve,
Yeah, I mean,
Capture
that
that, right?
captures what we've discussed.
Yeah.
That may not be the best thing, but that captures what we've discussed as maybe the most doable, practical with what we have.
I think if we can center the form around, some form of a quantitative metric on response to certain things, you know, as a prompt that people are being asked about, as they leave our organization, that would be consistent over time then to give us that kind of feedback that I think we're looking for.
Like consistency kind of in the questions.
For
that we
example, were you leaving because, benefits were an issue in this district? Were you leaving because your salary was not competitive? Were there's ways we can take a look at that, but I also wanna make sure that we identify a model that's got some, I'm
Fidelity.
struggling with words now. Like research-based best ways to ask those kinds of questions, right? So that, when people leave, we're getting the clearest answer and response from them. And the reason why a survey would probably be the best tool, if I've remembered, what the board's questions and discussion points were in this past semester, was that it's surrounded around if we can collect it and see some trends. So then we would want that in a digital format, I would imagine, because the more anecdotal and qualitative kind of feedback you get, it gets really skewed very quickly. So having like a consistent tool we're using and being able to push out would be really helpful.
Well, then you get consistency in how it's asked as opposed to a
Correct.
sit-down discussion, interpretations of questions, but also sometimes people, in a person-to-person interview might not be forthcoming with a situation, and it's at their option of responding to an online survey, so you protect their rights to be able to respond accordingly and potentially infuse some anonymity into the process if you needed to, you know, that sort of thing, if need be. So it's one of the reasons that I kind of like the thought process of a survey more than, and it's minimally resource dependent from a staffing perspective.
A survey from the standpoint, you would like send it in the mail to them, or someone would sit down
Electronic.
and talk to them?
It'd be electronic.
Email or, okay. I'm just wondering about the response rate on something like that.
Yeah, and if you do a little dive into this kind of a process, the response rate is very hit and miss.
Yeah.
You get a better response rate, what the research says, if you do it in person, because you're doing it person to person, but people can also refuse to do that.
Yeah.
There's also questions, if you dive into this whole kind of concept of, do you do it when they're still employed? Do you do it after they've left? Does that impact response rates? Like there's, from what I've seen, and I'm not like the expert on this by any stretch of the imagination, but just looking at what research is out there with exit surveys, is there's a lot of different pathways and avenues, and there's pros and cons. And one of the biggest challenges with it, whatever way you do it, is just basic reliability,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
Yeah.
It's fairly logical. A lot of the research too says, at least some would advocate for this, and maybe these are people who are looking to make a buck, but they would say that a third party is always better because the person who's getting interviewed feels a little safer because it's going somewhere else and not right to your employer or your former employer, who you maybe don't want to burn bridges with. So like, again, there's a lot of ways that this can go, but if we're gonna do this, I think we just need to probably determine a starting place, start somewhere, because right now, it's anecdotal.
So I'm thinking, real quick, this you know, I took my car into the dealership for a repair here recently, and afterwards, the advisor says, you know, asked me a couple questions, and, you know, I responded to him, and then he said, by the way, you're gonna get a survey, please mark a 5.
All of
on that survey.
Every time.
And, okay, and I was like, yeah, okay, and, I have yet to fill out one of those surveys. I
Right.
just don't do it, so.
Well, and that's a question, right? Like, and regardless of whatever survey you're gonna get, like, I mean, people don't usually go out of their way to say really positive things unless they're really, really positive, but people will be more than happy to fill out a survey for a complaint.
So,
You know.
yeah, and my point there is, when we were talking, as I was leaving, I was happy to answer his question. You know, I was like, yeah, you did, you know, fantastic job, or maybe I need to follow up on this, you know, like that. But then getting a survey in the mail,
Once you're
Just
moved
not gonna do
on,
it.
once you moved on, you're done.
yeah, so.
That's why the
I answered the
the
surveys for
reliability
Honda.
for-
I just want you to know, for McGrath Honda, I answer their surveys, but,
Did you give them all 5?
He
I
wasn't
did,
happy.
I do. Their
I don't
customer
think you would've
service has
been
been
happy.
really
My
strong.
friend used to do it when you get the free oil change if you answer the survey,
Yeah,
but we can't.
you have to
do that here.
incentivize it, right?
Is that what
But,
we're gonna do?
so my experiences previously, my district, as the HR leader there, we did have the practice of exit interviews. The turnout was really low. Actually, I'm gonna challenge your research. We did them in person and it was not as strong. The union leadership had asked if there was a way I could create a Google survey and make it a little more convenient, because one of the things they were getting as a feedback, they didn't wanna take the time to come and sit down and take 45 minutes. Especially because typically, the resignations, when they were coming in, that process with me started towards the end of the school year, and people wanted to get.
And or
going.
during the summer.
So, people actually liked that my team was just pushing the Google form to them, and we were able to start collecting a little bit more data through that methodology. I think there is a little bit of a reality we just have to be aware of. I don't think either methodology is gonna ever hit 100% of your exit rate in response to those surveys, whether it's in person or in a Google form. But I do, because of what we've approved as part of our plan, I do think it's a great idea of collecting some of this baseline data just to at least get a temperature feel of where we're at, right? I mean, the example I can give is like, we just approved, on my first year, the district had a new teacher's contract. So as we've had some teachers moving on, and I know anecdotally, like Steve was able to get and assess where some of these folks were going and why. But it would be nice to know, hey, was the new contract fair? You know, how would you rate it? Do we wanna use a Likert scale, 1 through 5? You know, and that would be nice to know as a board and as an administration to say like, okay, we're not missing the mark on salary, but maybe maybe we're a little off on health insurance, right? I'm making this up, by the way. This is not coming from any feedback. You know, you could, I don't know, there's a myriad of things that we can collect the feedback on and what people might say. But I know that was one of the things we asked at Niles, because it was very important to our board that they stay financially competitive with that region. And of course, that's you know, from a compensatory standpoint, it's a pretty competitive area with money. And so they were being closer to the city, you know, that was sometimes a deal breaker when you were comparing our district to another district straight up the 94. And so our board wanted to know that data, because then we would report that when we were talking about certain things.
So then did you, for Niles, did you have a third-party survey and then the union was like, yeah, can you do a Google Doc? Or was it always, like, how was it, you know, how did the process start?
We did not use a third party for the exit survey component. However, we used Panorama, and we paid extra to use the employee, what do you call it, the climate component of that, but you had to pay extra for some of that, so we always have to pay extra to use more.
Right.
But that's what we were doing to try and keep a temperature on how things were going with the district's employees.
And then after that, you did the Google Doc, or was that part of the?
No. When I walked in, we were already doing exit interviews, but they were in person, and then we switched it over to a Google form.
Because of the challenges that you were hearing from the Education Association and what you were seeing as far
And just
as
some
people
internal data we were looking at.
and participation
Yeah.
and whatever else.
To me, it was like, yeah, let's give it a try, because, again, you know, I was getting about 1 out of every 3, maybe 1 out of every 4
I was gonna
resignations.
say, I saw like 30 to 40% is like a
Yeah, you know, and
number.
you know, as they were leaving, I was just getting more of the specifics, but, you know, really, to Steve's point, I think he shared this, typically, because of the role I was in and the role Steve's in, they kind of share with you why they're leaving and what's happening. I think one of the things that shows value and what we're gonna try and do with our dashboard, though, is establish some baseline so that we have trend data that we can build off of moving forward, right?
So the in-person didn't work for you guys in Niles? Like that in-person interview?
No, people took me up on it. I'm just saying that the rate of like taking that offer was probably like 1 out of 4.
To talk with you in person?
Mhm.
Okay, all right. Yeah, but Steve, do you hear or do you talk to everyone that like puts in a resignation?
Not everyone. Some people I know. Like I got an email today of somebody, it's not in the board book yet, it'll be in there next month, and laid out exactly why.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I was thinking. I, you know, when we first talked about this, is, you know, you were sharing the list of people or whatever, and I guess I was envisioning that you had talked to these people, and then maybe in that conversation they shared the reason why they were leaving.
Sometimes that
And then you could
happens.
document that.
Right.
So, but maybe I guess I'm wrong on the participation rate on that, but.
Yeah, and the other issue that you probably are aware of is just from a capacity standpoint, I would have a major, I don't know how I could do it in May and June when a lot of this stuff happens. We don't have the capacity. We're the smallest HR department in King County.
And that's another reason why I'm encouraging that we consider the form component. I think it gives us a data warehouse. It allows us to
It's
have.
a start.
It gives us
We can-
consistency.
like, we can give it a shot.
responses.
Give the feedback, trends, whatever, and if it's meeting the need, great. If it's not, we can tweak and try something different. I mean, again, I think anything we start with is a start, because right now we don't have anything beyond anecdotal.
Would it be beneficial to get stakeholders involved in that process? Like, hey, you said their union reached out, so maybe we should go to the FESPA and BEA and say, what would be the best form of communication
I think that's
you
fair.
guys want, right?
Yeah, they reached out, but
Okay.
they just said, can you do a form instead? People don't wanna meet, take time to meet.
Right.
That was the only feedback they gave me.
But
and I was
Raquel,
like,
yeah,
sure.
speak-
Yeah,
absolutely.
but we
I
can.
mean, yeah, I mean, because, yeah, like,
We meet regularly with the leadership teams, so.
I met with one today.
You just, yeah.
I mean, I was just curious, like, if that union was like, yeah, give us Google Doc, I don't want the survey, maybe those would be the same. Like, yeah.
Well, and my challenge, right, is like 3 months out of the year, a lot of staff is not in the buildings, they're not working here. So getting access to get them to come back in or do a phone might be really, really challenging to do that. And that's a big component because like you said, May, June, and then from what I've heard, there's sometimes an uptick in July, August as well.
It can happen, yes.
Yeah.
I think the survey is the way to go. It seems like our partners prefer that method, so I think, for me, that's like the no-brainer. Like, let's start there. And, see what we get a year from now, I guess.
Yeah, and what I would want, I mean, we can do it a couple different ways. Number one, if there's specific data, questions, themes that you wanna know, Tom and I would like to know that.
I mean,
Or-
that was a question, like, why are we doing this? For me, it's personally like, okay, so identifying, like, okay, like Tom was saying, are people leaving because compensation, work environment is hostile, or, there could be, I don't know, you figure out 5 or 6 categories of why most people are gonna leave. And then, again, for me, it's like all about trends, or like if it pops, like, hey, 75% of the people say their pay's not competitive, then that would be something like actionable, like, okay, now we know, like, okay, this is the situation, we need to re-examine this or that, like, that's why I would think we're doing it. I mean, I could be wrong if that's what other board members don't think, but, like, I'm trying to figure, like, why are we collecting the data? That's why I think.
So we can see the trends on why people are leaving.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
My only statement as to like what's actually crafted in it is I'm always asking like what are in our kind of group, like large unit, whatever, what are they doing and what questions are they asking? And if there's like, okay, here's 5 of them, what information in this do you board find would be good to know from your perspective, and these are the ones we would recommend anyway, because it'd be good for us, then I think that gives us a foundation to kind of work from, because then we can learn from other people's trials and tribulations.
Yeah, for sure, I can
Yeah.
get that.
And we may
very-
find
very
out you're like,
easily.
nope, nobody else is doing this, you know?
Well, some are, some aren't.
Yeah, yeah, and so just, it'd be good to understand what they're asking. Because then potentially, if we pick similar questions or we work through it, that might be good data that you could correlate between other districts and ours to find out if they're experiencing the same trends that we are, which we kind of anecdotally know, but not necessarily know. Okay, so, anything else on that? So I'm hearing provide information, and if there's board action needed related to that, let us know and we'll consider it further. All right. That concludes both board matters elements. Next is the public hearing on the 2025 budget and fund transfer. Tony, would you like to follow up?
I would. So the purpose of this item this evening is to hold a public hearing on our 2025 budget and the fund transfers, the interfund transfers that are incorporated into it. It's a requirement that we do this before we adopt. This year, as you may recall, we're going to be adopting the budget in August, which is a month earlier than we typically do, and that is a new cadence for us that we would hope to continue in future years so that we can better allocate our resources in terms of the timing of our calendar. So what we'll be bringing you a month from today would be a final budget for adoption, pending any feedback that we get from the board or any feedback that the board wants to consider from the community. So I'm going to give a brief update of what's in this budget, and then if there's anybody here that would like to address the board this evening, they may do so on the budget and the fund transfers. First, I want to give a high-level overview of the budget itself. It includes $133 million in revenues and $134.5 million in expenses. So that is a overall deficit of almost $1.5 million, closer to 1.4 depending on how you round the numbers. And initially, at first blush, that does cause some heart palpitations. We do expected this to be the case. However, the overage is in what we call the non-operating funds, and that is because we're spending money out of fund balance for capital projects primarily, almost exclusively, actually. In our operating funds, we have an excess, we have a surplus of 1.6 million. Our operating funds are the funds that we use to run the district on a daily basis. They exclude special purpose funds like debt service for paying for our bonds and our capital projects, among others. One interesting note here is that this budget does include some $23 million for what are called on-behalf payments that the state of Illinois makes for our teachers' pensions. That money does not come into our coffers per se. They're included here for budgetary purposes that we have to estimate and report to the state, and they're in our financial reports. And so I include them in the budget as the bottom line number, but really what's moving through our coffers is some $110 million of actual money we'll see come in and go out of our accounts over the course of the fiscal year. Another important thing to note is that our property tax revenues, we're going to see an increase in those receipts of just under 1% this year. It doesn't mean that tax bills will go up 1%. That's just what we'll get in terms of total revenues. And the reason why that appears lower than we're accustomed to this year is because our bond payments are going to go down, or they're going to start going down. And it gets a little complicated here because how levy years and tax years and all that stuff works. Essentially, when tax years and levy years come in, they get split between 2 fiscal years, but we're going to start to see the first part of the upcoming levy where our bond payments will go down. For many years, we had a stable bond payment of $9-ish million. That's going to almost be cut in half, about $4.5, $5 million. And so we'll see the tax rate going down accordingly, and we'll provide some degree of tax relief. Evidence-based funding, which is formerly known as general state aid, will not change. We're a Tier 4 district, which according to the state of Illinois, we have adequate revenues that come from a local standpoint, from our local taxpayers, to pay for our expenses. And so We cannot expect to receive any more money from the state of Illinois, unfortunately. Overall state reimbursements will be down 6%. And federal funding will go down considerably too, because the pandemic relief funds will be completely spent. In fact, they've already been spent in totality. We're done with those. We won't see any of those in this upcoming fiscal year. We'll see increases in just about everywhere else in terms of our expenditures. But as I noted, what's important to note here is that we'll be spending fund balance for capital projects, which we anticipate. They do not include any of the improvements to Storm and Louise in this fiscal year, but they will be coming in the following fiscal year, and those will be some rather large numbers, and we will spend down significant fund balance in the next couple of years to be able to fund those projects. Overall staffing up right now, by all accounts, 6.7 FTE. That's despite enrollment declining, estimated decline of about 1.7% to just over 5,100 students, maybe closer to 5,200 as we finalize those enrollments for August. An improvement, however, in the pupil-to-staff ratio. Keep a close eye on that. Right now, at present, we estimate our pupil-to-staff ratio as being 7.9, so that means there are 7.9 students for every staff member. We expect that to be 7.6, so that's a rather large decrease for a given fiscal year. That would be a 3/10 of a point is large.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? How can you have a point, can you explain why there could be a 0.7? Like, how can full-time employees be like a fraction?
So that's why we do it in FTE. I glossed over that. Thank you for asking that question. FTE stands for full-time equivalency, and we do have many part-time employees. We have many part-time campus monitors. We have some part-time paraprofessionals. We have other people who work throughout the district on a part-time status. And so
RNs.
yeah, exactly. So we try so that we can compare apples to apples, and just instead of heads, we do it in terms of FTE. Years ago, we used to do it in heads, and in some cases, one head isn't.
Not all heads are the same.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. When you're talking about fractions of an FTE, like some people work 0.2 FTE, and you count them as one head, it's not a very good comparison.
We don't count any of the contracted employees, true that, right? The contracted people, we don't, that's not part.
No, we do not. So these are people who work directly for us and who are paid salaries, and in some cases, if they're eligible, benefits. In most cases, if they're full-time, they're receiving benefits. But like for instance, the authorization that you gave to Steve this evening for those contracted employees, they are not included in those numbers. But that does bring up a really good point. Thank you for asking that question. What you see in this budget are staffing, salaries, and benefits for those positions that the board has authorized, and that includes the 674.9 FTE. But in this case, we're gonna outsource essentially up to eight of those positions if we need to. So that those 8 people would not necessarily be included in that 674.9 FTE. And those salaries and benefits would be moved over to purchase services to pay for those contracts. But for the purposes of comparing apples to apples, we've included them here up front because our desire and intent is to hire these positions, and that is what we're going to angle to do, and we'll attempt to do if we can. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I won't belabor this anymore, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have, or any questions from the public.
Any questions we have?
I had a note, and I apologize I didn't ask you this. I believe there was an expense called tuition and other. It was around 1.7 million. I don't know if it was for special education.
Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what that would be, but it would have to be tuition for special education. So it could be overall tuition, and so not all tuition is special education. For example, we pay tuition for the Fox Valley career program. That would be a tuition number that's included in that overall line item. But yeah, we do spend a lot of money on tuition for special education and other services that we cannot provide directly to our students.
That's what you had explained it as before. These are situations where it's not something that we could move in-house.
Exactly.
Okay.
We're paying another organization, generally is gonna be another public institution, and in some cases for special education will be a private institution. We're paying for them to provide services to our students. Mid-Valley would also be
That'll be
tuition,
one.
yes.
Then there's some specialized programs that are within the state or outside of our state that we have to pay for.
Did I get that right, Josh? Thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions?
Love that he's checking with Josh.
All right. One more thing I'm obligated to cover before we move on to asking, if anybody else wants to ask questions, are the fund transfers, and I'll cover those very briefly. And Holly, those are in the budget memo. You could go back to that, please. We're transferring $56,957 from the education fund to the debt service fund. That's to pay for capital leases, and specifically, that's to pay for the activity buses that we lease. So we can't spend that money, according to our accountants, directly out of the education fund. We have to transfer it to the debt service fund before we pay those bills.
Sorry, Tony, where is this at?
It's right in the memo. It's in the agenda.
In the agenda.
7.2.
Transferring $48,000 from the operations and maintenance fund to the debt service fund to pay for the lease of the maintenance building, and for the same reason. We cannot pay for that debt out of those funds. We have to transfer it. So we're seeking your authorization to do that. And then lastly, the $3.5 million, that's how we're funding our capital projects. And so this is the annual allocation that we have for capital projects. And we move that money into capital projects funds because it gets really tricky as to when sometimes those bills come due. Oftentimes that work, as Craig knows well as an architect, it's very challenging to know exactly when you're going to get the bill from some contractors because of the way that work happens and the schedule. Our fiscal year ends on June 30th, and sometimes the bills show up in June, sometimes the bills show up in August. And so anyway, we use the capital projects fund as more or less like a piggy bank. We're transferring funds out of our O&M fund to pay for our capital projects. And this year, we're spending more out of that fund than we are putting into it, but we put more in prior years into that fund. So it's not as though we're running a negative balance.
And Tony, can we just make sure we're clear, the work that we're doing and the work that you alluded to that will be happening next year, this was all approved through our warm, safe, and dry plan last December?
Yes, that's a very good point.
So I
Thank you.
just want to make sure that everybody understands that we are trying to do our best to stay on top of maintenance cycles. Mark and his team are doing everything they can to stay on top of this.
And we're working diligently on our health, life, safety plan. It's taking longer to complete. We've got some other aspects of it that we have to work through, but it does appear that some of those expenses are larger than we anticipated. We're going to have to incorporate those into this work as well. So we'll process that this coming fall and probably into the winter.
So just to clarify, and you hinted at it earlier, like, these are not being transfers because there was some sort of weirdo shortage in the other one. It's almost like an accounting requirement of the state that you expend dollars on certain things under certain fund categories.
Yes. Yes. There are accounting requirements and funds that, money is taken in for a specific purpose, must be spent on that purpose, and there are, of course, exceptions. But long-term debt has to be paid out of the debt service fund. That's, our accountants and lawyers' interpretation. And so in some cases, we have to move money out of certain funds, even though into the debt service fund to pay for it. So.
Tony, sorry, is a balanced budget required by law for this?
You would
By the
think,
state?
but no, it's not. And for all intents and purposes, we do have a balanced budget from an operating standpoint. We're spending fund balance on capital projects.
Okay, so, and sorry if you said this, but the 1.4 million shortfall, how do we make that up? Or where is that money coming from?
So in prior years, we had transferred money from O&M, and in 1 year from the ed fund, but from O&M to capital projects, and we didn't spend all of it. And we knew this was gonna happen because we treat the capital projects fund as a piggy bank. Sometimes we move more money there. We can't necessarily spend all the money in a given year for all the projects, because some of the projects don't fit together perfectly. So we treat that as a piggy bank, and there's more money in that fund that will cover the deficit. But we're just spending more money overall this year than we happen to be taking in, but we knew we were going to do that.
So you would put money in the piggy bank for this quote-unquote rainy day.
Right.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
We saved for it before. Yeah.
I agree, so this is the first time
Big Tony.
Tony's presented a
digging
budget
into
where
our
the
savings.
expenses outstrip the
Yeah.
revenues.
Okay, that's what
But again, that fund balance is in our I don't wanna put words in your mouth, but we're in a healthy position compared to we were like a decade ago.
Oh, yeah, very
There
much
was,
so.
you know, the piggy bank was pretty empty.
Best you're ever gonna get from Tony is we're in a comfortable position.
Right. So,
Wouldn't say that.
Okay, maybe.
we had a discussion, so that fund balance, you know, there's room to operate, but it's, you know, we have to be very careful because,
It's a finite
we're gonna
resource.
start using that fund balance.
We
So
are.
Be very strategic in how we're utilizing it.
Right, and these numbers are gonna get much bigger. So to do the work at Storm and Louise that we planned for in this warm, safe, dry plan, this deficit is going to be tens of millions of dollars next year. And we have accounted for that with our fund balance.
Can you
So-
remind me what our fiscal year is?
Our fiscal year starts on July 1
It is, okay.
and ends on June 30th. And we have to adopt the budget by the end of the first quarter, so that would be September 30th.
Maybe I'm just confused with the capital projects list showing HCS work in FY 2025.
Yeah, I have some of that work is actually, it's come to, yes, I do have some of that work noted, like, we'll pay some of those bills in '25.
Okay,
But the real work, we'll start working, our plan right now is to let bids on Storm and Louise simultaneously. And what's likely to happen there is that we'll start the interior work on Storm this coming June, so almost a year from now.
Okay.
Probably late May. And do all the interior work that summer, and then do the interior work at Louise White the following year, and the exterior work at Storm the following year. So some of those bills are gonna come in this year,
okay,
and I
got
did
it.
account for that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah. But the real work, in terms of letting the bids and whatnot, and the real costs won't come until '26.
It's a real challenge when you're trying to do construction work and your fiscal year ends right at the beginning of it. So I mean, I've had clients and others talk about like, just, can you not have me a contract or send me a bill until August, you know, first? Because of the challenges associated with funding things over year.
But it's really important that the board have an understanding, and so we can, even if, this doesn't have to be the end of the conversation, we can talk more about it next month, and we can talk about it as much as you like, so that you feel comfortable with how these things are ebbing and flowing, because it's important that you have a solid understanding of it. And that you feel comfortable with it. Then you have an understanding of what's gonna come next, because I don't want you to feel as though, like, you don't know what's gonna happen in '26 or '27. But to your point earlier, Craig, about us being in a comfortable position, I would say we are on glide path, where we have in those operating funds some surplus, but we do have expectations for increasing needs, both for staffing,
Yep.
for staff pay, for the costs of benefits, and making sure that we constrain that inflation. We can't necessarily count on some of our revenues that we're receiving right now. Right now, we have a lot of money invested with our fund balance, and we're earning considerable interest on those earnings. It's not something we've had in the past. But as we spend fund balance, that will go away, of course. And recall, just a few years ago, we were issuing what were called tax anticipation warrants, because we didn't have enough cash to get through the fiscal year. It was kind of like a payday loan. I have to mention this every year. Wasn't that long ago, we were basically borrowing money to get through the fiscal year so that we could make payrolls and pay our bills. And so we've come a long way in these last few years. But as I like to say, we're on glide path. We just need to make sure that we stay on that glide path, so that we don't, our expenditures don't exceed what we can anticipate our revenues to be. Otherwise, things get really painful very quickly.
All right. Open to other questions from the community or others?
Yeah.
Okay, hearing none. Anything else from the board on this topic? All right. We don't need no action on this at
No
this point in
action.
time, so,
But there will be action next month.
the next month. Okay, thank you. All right, next, item 8.1 is administrative comments. Tom, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so, as we sit here on July 23rd, the next time we meet together, officially, we will have been 5 days into the school year. So I just want to kind of bring that up. So, board, I do invite you to join us on August 12th for opening day. I'm sure our staff and administration would love to see you there if you're available. We will be kicking off our opening institute day there at the BFAC at 8 a.m. So again, I'll make sure you get reminders, don't worry. but we'll remind you of that. We're really excited about the programming for that day, and then the week prior to that, we'll be bringing in all of our new teachers into the district. Our team has done a great job of building a really robust agenda to help support them coming into the district. And I know they'll have time to work with their mentors as well. So a lot to kind of sprint in to get this opening of the year ready to go. We're really excited also. Happy to report over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of meetings and discussions with administrative teams, with the BEA and BESPA about the new strategic plan, how we're gonna continue to work towards capturing this work collaboratively and move it forward. I really appreciate the conversation we had here tonight. It's a huge component as well of this. As a reminder, the strategic plan is all of our plan. It's the district's framework for how we're gonna approach our work. And as Brad alluded to today, our CAC meeting today already had some great conversations, and centered around that was our strategic plan and how do we address some of the components there. So I'm really excited about that. I do want to thank all of our administrators, the BEA reps and BESPA reps who have been able to take time to meet throughout this summer to continue this work on the collaboration that we're doing. And board, I'm looking forward to having conversations with you about some of the things we'll bring to you, because we're all in this, and we all have a component, I guess is the best way to put that. And then the last thing is I'm mentioning, we're getting near the end of the summer and bringing students back. And today I had my final daughter and dad birthday breakfast. I like to take my girls out one-on-one breakfast with me when they have their birthdays, and they're all summer birthdays. And so today was my last one. She's my youngest one. And it was just a pretty, I don't know, it was a heartbreaking reminder of how much older my kids are getting year by year, and it's tough. And Steve and I actually, everybody on our admin team, we kind of talk about that as our kids are aging. And so, the thing is, though, that makes me excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing is our kids back in our buildings. The summertime is really quiet, and even though we're busy with work, but now we get to do the stuff with kids in the buildings and the staff back in the buildings. So I'm excited about that. But I do hope that all of our parents and guardians in the district are soaking up what remains of the summer and time together as a family. And just looking forward to our next meeting, because we'll get to report on a successful opening of the year.
Are you saying you're not gonna have breakfast with your daughters anymore?
Ever,
Yes.
apparently.
Maybe not one-on-one.
You'll have.
This is a very intentional thing. They've actually started to look forward to this.
Yeah.
And I hope that stays the same way.
You'll have more.
Final one for this year.
Oh, okay.
That's all I got. All right. Thank you.
All right. Next is board comments. So would you like to start since you're at that end, or?
Sure.
anything? Okay.
Sure, I don't have much, just enjoy the last weeks of summer, be safe. And thank you to all of our amazing staff that are working hard to welcome everyone back in August.
Me, okay, so I will say thank you to everybody that came to the board meeting tonight, everyone that reached out to us. Again, that feedback's very important. We appreciate everyone who wants to raise their voice and share their opinions on things. I want to wish everyone a happy summer. I do want to point out the two gentlemen in the back. This is off the top of my head, but I want to thank David. Everyone's sort of aware of that CrowdStrike incident that sort of paralyzed a lot of organizations. I'm sure David had a few anxious moments there initially, but we survived it, so thank you for that. And then I want to thank Tom and Josh. Before the board meeting tonight, we got a little sneak peek of some of the new menu options that are going to be available at the high school. I think there's going to be a lot of very happy students. What's waiting for them. So it's really exciting to kind of get a chance to see that. So thank you for that. And everyone have a safe summer, and I look forward to everyone getting back to it in about 3 weeks.
Just enjoy the last weeks of summer, be healthy and be safe.
Yes, looking forward to the start of the school year, but just want to say I appreciate fellow board members here, that we had a good conversation here, and as well as the administration, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Would you like to add anything
That's
to
your
that, RJ?
Tony's looking at his watch. He's
I
ready
just
to
got my bedtime reminder, actually.
No, I got mine too. We have the same bedtime reminder.
I would like to thank Tony, Brad, and Steve. I know it's not easy. It kind of felt like we had you guys up on the hot seat today. So I really appreciate your willingness to have an open discussion about all your practices and everything that we've been doing, because I have no doubt that you have the best interests in mind of our students and faculty. So I think you guys have done great work over the years, and I know we're only gonna get better. So I appreciate your willingness to listen to us. And then I did want to call out, one of the things that we had talked about a lot was how we're gonna, I guess, own or make sure that people, that Tom and company are being responsible, and how we're gonna make sure that they're owning the responsibilities of the strategic plan. So the one thing that I just want to call is that we get updates from Tom weekly, and the change that you made to the last update where you're putting in parentheses at the end of the different bullet point items where you're showing this is related to this portion of the strategic plan, I think shows great ownership. It shows that you've got it on mind at all time when you're doing things. I believe you said faculty are gonna start doing this as well? Or-
The
Yeah.
leadership team, since we do a lot of the
Your
communicating. out.
cabinet.
Yeah,
Your
yeah,
ca-
and the,
yeah.
and the buildings.
Yeah, so I think that's great. I think it's a great way to show ownership, and that it's on your mind at all times, that each action that you're taking is reflective of a different, one of our priorities or strategies, so I really appreciate that. And that's it. And,
Thank you, Roger.
yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. And I'd like to thank my wife for just being my wife, that's all.
Solid. I won't belabor anything. Thank you, everybody, for coming today, for those of you that came, and a good discussion today with the board. We have much more to do on all of those topics, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction, at least for right now. Thank you to the administration and to Tom for all the hard work they do throughout the entire summer, and look forward to first day of school for the teachers and the staff that come back in their perspective, maybe unfortunately, very, very near future. So, as I have one at home who's counting down the days. A little positive, a little negative. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody. All right. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. So move very quickly
Second.
by Raquel, second by RJ. All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nope. I heard a nope, so I don't think that counts. It is now 9:46. The meeting is adjourned.
I said no.
Thank you, everyone.
Don't oppose it. Is that the wrong way to vote?
I just